When Emma Sinclair's faith shattered on a desolate Montana trail in 1872, she never imagined a stranger's kindness would become her salvation. This is the story of a mail-order bride who lost everything, her belongings, her future husband, and her belief in God's plan, only to discover that sometimes the greatest blessings come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below so I can see how far Emma's journey has traveled. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The rain came down in sheets that October afternoon, turning the Montana Territory Road into a river of mud and broken dreams. Emma Sinclair pressed her forehead against the rough wooden wall of the disabled stagecoach, her fingers white-knuckled around a Bible that had once brought her comfort but now felt like nothing more than dead weight in her trembling hands. 26 days. That's how long she'd been traveling from Boston, each mile taking her farther from everything she'd known and closer to a future that had just been ripped away from her. The telegram was still crumpled in her coat pocket, the words burned into her memory even though the ink had run in the rain. Robert Chambers deceased, fever, arrangements canceled, do not proceed to Silver Creek. Emma closed her eyes and tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. They hadn't come for 3 days now, not since she'd received that telegram at the last way station. The conductor had offered to turn the coach around to take her back to civilization, but she'd insisted on continuing. Why? Pride, perhaps, or maybe just the stubborn refusal to admit that God had abandoned her completely. "Miss Sinclair?" The driver's gruff voice cut through the sound of rain hammering on the coach roof. "We're going to be here a while. Axles cracked clean through, and with this storm ain't nobody coming to help us until morning at the earliest." Emma didn't respond. What was there to say? Of course the axle was broken. Of course they were stranded. It was simply the latest in a string of disasters that had marked her journey west like bloody footprints in snow. She thought back to the beginning, to 6 weeks ago when this had all seemed like such a grand adventure. Her father's debts had been mounting in Boston, gambling debts he'd hidden from her until the creditors came knocking. The teaching position at the girls' school barely covered their rent, let alone the money he owed. When her father came home with the advertisement for mail-order brides needed in the Montana Territory, Emma had been horrified at first. "Absolutely not, Papa," she'd said, setting down her teacup with enough force to make it rattle. "I won't be shipped off like cattle to marry a complete stranger just to solve your financial problems." But her father, Joseph Sinclair, had looked so old in that moment, so defeated. The man who'd once stood tall in the pulpit of their small church, who'd preached about faith and providence and God's plan, was now hunched over their kitchen table with tears in his eyes. "Emma, sweetheart, I've already signed the agreement," he'd whispered. "Robert Chambers sent the money for your passage and a dowry payment against my debts. If you don't go, they'll take everything, the house, my books, everything your mother left us. They might even bring criminal charges." Emma had felt her world tilting on its axis. "You had no right. I had no choice," her father's voice had cracked. "Mr. Chambers seems like a good man. He's a successful merchant in Silver Creek, Montana. He's a widower looking for a Christian wife to help him raise his young daughter. Emma, please, I've prayed about this. I truly believe this is God's plan for you." God's plan. Those words had sustained her through the first difficult days of preparation, through saying goodbye to her students, through the tears of leaving Boston. She'd clutched her mother's Bible and told herself that this was all part of some greater purpose she couldn't yet see. Robert's letters had been kind, thoughtful. He'd written about his dry goods store, about his 8-year-old daughter Mary, who missed having a mother, about the beautiful Montana mountains and the community of faithful people in Silver Creek. Emma had even started to feel hopeful. Perhaps this arranged marriage would become something real. Perhaps she could build a life in the West, teach children in a frontier school, make a difference in a growing community. She'd sewn herself a simple wedding dress from blue calico, packed her mother's china carefully in straw, and included the small wooden cross her father had carved for her when she was confirmed. The first disaster had struck outside of Chicago. Their train car had been robbed in the night. Bandits had moved through while passengers slept, taking anything of value. Emma had woken to find her trunk overturned, her mother's china shattered, the silver locket with her parents' portraits gone. Even her wedding dress had been stolen, probably for the fabric. All she had left was her mother's Bible, which she'd been using as a pillow, and the clothes on her back. She'd wired her father for help, but the responding telegram had crushed what remained of her hope. No money to send. Creditors seized everything. House sold. I've gone to stay with your uncle in New York. Trust in God, my darling girl. Love, Papa. Emma had stood in that telegraph office in Chicago, surrounded by strangers, and felt truly alone for the first time in her life. But she'd pulled herself together, darned the holes in her traveling dress, and continued on. Robert was expecting her. Robert would help her. This was still God's plan. The second disaster came on the wagon train portion of the journey. They'd been 4 days out from the last fort when cholera swept through their group. Emma had spent 72 hours helping the wagon master's wife tend to the sick, holding water to cracked lips, praying over dying children. 3 people had died, including a young mother Emma had befriended. She'd helped dig the graves in the hard prairie soil, had sung hymns over the rough wooden crosses, and had tried desperately to hear God's voice telling her why. But there had been only silence. And then, at the last way station before Silver Creek, the telegram about Robert, dead of the same fever that was ravaging the region. His brother Harold would be settling his affairs. Emma was advised not to come. That's when something inside her had broken. Not dramatically, not with tears or screaming or any outward sign. Just a quiet, terrible snapping, like a rope pulled too tight finally giving way. She'd walked into the small station chapel, knelt before the simple wooden altar, and felt nothing. No comfort, no peace, no sense of divine presence, just emptiness. I don't understand, she'd whispered to the silence. I've tried to be faithful. I've tried to trust your plan, but Papa's ruined. Robert's dead, and I'm stranded 1,000 miles from home with no money and nowhere to go. Where are you in all this? Where is the purpose? Where is the love you're supposed to have for your children? The silence had been her only answer. Now, 3 days later, she sat in a broken stagecoach in the middle of a rainstorm, and Emma Sinclair realized she simply didn't care anymore. About God, about faith, about any of it. She was done. Miss Sinclair? The driver was at her door again, rain dripping from his hat brim. The other passengers are taking shelter in some rocks yonder. Might be more comfortable than staying in here. I'll be working on the axle, such as I can in this weather. Emma finally turned to look at him. Thomas Greeley had been kind throughout this journey, patient with her silence and her grief. He was a weathered man in his 50s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner despite his rough appearance. Mr. Greeley, she said quietly, do you believe in God? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He shifted his weight, water streaming off his oilskin coat. Well now, I suppose I do, miss, in my own way. And do you believe he has a plan for us? That everything happens for a reason? Thomas Greeley studied her for a long moment, and Emma saw understanding dawn in his eyes. He'd witnessed her disasters one by one. He'd delivered that final terrible telegram. I believe, he said slowly, that life is hard, Miss Sinclair, especially out here. I've seen good people suffer and bad people prosper. I've seen children die and scoundrels live to old age. If there's a plan, it's beyond my understanding. He paused, then added, but I've also seen unexpected kindnesses, strangers helping strangers, people finding strength they didn't know they had. Maybe that's God working, or maybe it's just people being decent. Either way, it's worth holding on to. Emma wanted to argue, but she was too tired. Instead, she gathered her carpet bag, containing only her Bible, a spare blouse, and the wooden cross, and stepped down from the coach. The mud immediately sucked at her boots, and the rain soaked through her cloak within seconds. The rocks are that way, miss, Thomas pointed. About 50 yards. You'll see the others. But Emma didn't head toward the rocks. Instead, she found herself walking in the opposite direction, away from the broken stagecoach, away from the other passengers, away from everything. She didn't know where she was going. She just needed to be alone. The prairie stretched out before her, gray and endless under the storming sky. The rain plastered her hair to her face, and her skirts grew heavy with mud and water. She walked until she couldn't see the coach anymore, until there was nothing but the storm and the vast, indifferent landscape. Finally, Emma's legs gave out. She sank to her knees in the mud, the rain pouring down on her, and let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. It was absurd, all of it. She'd come west full of hope and faith, believing in divine providence and new beginnings. And for what? To end up on her knees in the Montana mud with nothing and no one? Why? The word tore from her throat, raw and desperate. Why did you let me believe? Why did you let me hope? She pulled her mother's Bible from her bag, holding it up to the storming sky. The leather was already soaking through, the pages beginning to curl. I've tried to be good, she shouted into the wind. I've prayed. I've had faith. I've trusted in your plan. And you've taken everything, my mother, my home, my future, everything. What more do you want from me? The only answer was thunder rolling across the plains. Emma clutched the Bible to her chest, her whole body shaking. Lord, I can't see your purpose anymore, she whispered. I can't feel you. I can't hear you. Are you even there? Or have I been praying to silence all along? She stayed there, kneeling in the mud, as the storm raged around her. She didn't pray, she didn't cry. She simply existed in that space between faith and despair, too broken to go forward, too stubborn to give up entirely. That's when she heard it. The sound of hoofbeats, slow and steady through the rain. Emma's head snapped up. Through the sheets of rain, she could make out a figure on horseback approaching from the west. Her heart began to pound. Out here, alone, vulnerable. She'd heard the stories about what happened to unprotected women on the frontier. She struggled to her feet, her sodden skirts making her clumsy. The rider drew closer, and Emma could make out more details now. A tall man on a sturdy bay horse, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a long duster coat. He sat his saddle with the easy grace of someone born to it. When he was about 20 feet away, he reined in his horse and tipped his hat back. Emma found herself looking into a pair of steady blue eyes set in a weathered, angular face. He was perhaps in his early 30s, with dark hair and the kind of quiet strength that comes from years of hard work and harder living. "Miss," he called out, his voice cutting through the storm. "You shouldn't be out here alone." Emma wanted to laugh at the absurdity of that statement. Where exactly should she be? But something about his tone, concerned rather than threatening, made her pause. "I'm fine," she called back, though they both knew it was a lie. She was soaked to the bone, covered in mud, miles from anywhere in the middle of a storm. The cowboy, because that's clearly what he was, studied her for a moment. Then he slowly dismounted, moving with deliberate care as if not to spook her. He left his horse's reins loose, and Emma noticed the animal was well trained enough to stand without being tied. "I don't mean to intrude, ma'am," he said, closer now, "but I saw the broken stage about half a mile back. Figured I'd check for anyone in trouble." His eyes took in her condition, and something like pity flickered across his face before he mastered it. "You look like you could use some help." "I don't need help," Emma said, her pride making one last stand. I needed some air." This time he did smile, just a little. Some air? In a rainstorm? While kneeling in the mud? Despite everything, Emma felt heat creep up her neck. It did sound ridiculous when he put it that way. She looked down at herself, at her ruined dress, her muddy hands still clutching the Bible, her hair hanging in wet ropes around her face. What a picture she must make. "I was praying," she said, though the words tasted like ashes in her mouth. The cowboy's expression softened. Must have been some powerful prayer to need this much space. "It was a goodbye," Emma said quietly, surprised at her own honesty. "To God, to faith, to all of it." She expected judgment, or perhaps one of those well-meaning but ultimately useless platitudes people always offered when faith wavered. Instead, the cowboy simply nodded slowly. "That kind of goodbye," he said. "I've made a few of those myself." Something in his tone made Emma look up at him again, really look. His eyes held a depth of understanding that suggested he wasn't just being polite. He'd been where she was. He knew what it felt like to stand in the storm and rage at heaven. "The stage won't be fixed until tomorrow at the earliest," he said after a moment. "And this storm's not letting up. My family's ranch is about 3 miles northwest of here. You'd be welcome to dry off, get a warm meal, maybe some sleep in an actual bed." Every sensible part of Emma's brain screamed at her to refuse. Never go with a strange man to an isolated location. It was one of the first rules of frontier survival. But as she stood there, shivering in the rain, exhausted beyond measure, she found she didn't much care about sensible anymore. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You don't know me." "Don't need to," he replied simply. "You need help, and I can provide it. Seems pretty straightforward to me." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Also, my mother would skin me alive if she found out I left a lady standing in the rain. Martha Dawson doesn't tolerate poor manners." Despite everything, Emma felt a smile tug at her lips. "Dawson?" "Colt Dawson, ma'am." He touched his hat brim in a gesture that was somehow both formal and friendly. "Of the Dawson Creek Ranch." "Emma Sinclair," she heard herself say. "Of nowhere, apparently." Something flickered in Colt's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or sympathy. He didn't press for details, just gestured toward his horse. "Can you ride, Miss Sinclair?" "I can." That much was true. Her father had kept a horse when she was young, before the debts mounted. She'd been a fair rider once upon a time. "Good. We'll stop by the stage to let the driver know where you've gone. Don't want anyone thinking I've kidnapped you. And then head to the ranch." As Colt helped her into his saddle and then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to grasp the reins, Emma found herself wondering if she'd lost her mind completely. She was riding off into a storm with a strange man based on nothing but a gentle manner and kind eyes. But as they started moving through the rain, Emma realized something. She felt the first faint stirrings of hope. Not faith. Faith was still lying shattered somewhere back in that mud. But hope. The hope that maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't have to face tomorrow alone. Colt Dawson kept his horse to a steady walk, mindful of his passenger. He could feel her shivering against him, her entire body tense with cold and exhaustion. She held herself carefully, trying not to lean against him, but every few minutes her strength would fail and she'd sway backward. Each time, he'd steady her without comment. They stopped briefly at the stage, where Thomas Greeley's relief was palpable. "Thank the Lord," the driver said, looking up at Emma. "I was about to organize a search party, Miss Sinclair. You gave me a terrible fright." "I apologize, Mr. Greeley," Emma said, and she meant it. The man had been kind to her. He didn't deserve the worry. "Mr. Dawson has offered shelter at his ranch until the repairs are complete." Thomas looked at Colt with assessing eyes. "Dawson Creek Ranch?" "Yes, sir." "I know your mother Martha," Thomas said, and his posture relaxed completely. "Good woman. Fine family." He nodded to Emma. "You'll be well cared for, miss. I'll send word there tomorrow, once we've got the stage sorted." As they rode away from the broken coach, Colt felt Emma's shivering intensify. The rain was relentless and the temperature was dropping as evening approached. He urged his horse, Ranger, into a faster pace. "Not much farther," he said, close to her ear so she could hear him over the storm. 10 more minutes." Emma didn't respond, but he felt her nod slightly. Colt found himself curious about this woman who'd been kneeling in the mud, saying goodbye to God. Her accent marked her as Eastern educated, probably Boston or New York. Her clothes, though ruined now, had been quality once. And that Bible she'd been clutching, the way she held it suggested it meant something, even if her faith didn't anymore. He knew that feeling, knew it intimately. He'd said his own goodbye to God 7 years ago, standing over his father's grave, then again 3 years later in a Confederate field hospital. It had taken a long time, and a minor miracle, to find his way back. Maybe that's why he'd felt compelled to help this stranger. He recognized a fellow traveler on the broken road. The ranch house finally came into view through the rain, and Colt felt his passenger sag with relief. It wasn't much to look at from the outside. A sturdy 2-story structure built from local timber and stone, with a wide front porch and smoke curling from 2 chimneys. But after the disaster of the past weeks, Emma thought it looked like paradise. Colt dismounted first, then helped Emma down. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet touched the ground, and he had to steady her with a hand on her elbow. "Easy now," he said. "You're safe." The front door burst open, and a woman appeared in the lamplight, 50s or early 60s, Colt's mother clearly, with the same blue eyes and strong features. She took one look at Emma and immediately sprang into action. "Colton James Dawson, what in heaven's name? Get that poor girl inside this instant. She's half frozen." "Yes, ma'am," Colt said, but he was grinning. "Mama, this is Miss Emma Sinclair. Stage broke down about 3 miles south. Miss Sinclair, my mother, Martha Dawson." But Martha was already herding Emma inside, clucking like a mother hen. "Don't just stand there, Colt. Get a fire going in the guest room. And tell Rosa we need hot water for a bath. Lots of it. Poor child, you're soaked through." Emma found herself swept into a warm, lamp-lit home that smelled of bread and wood smoke. There was a large sitting room with comfortable furniture, bright rag rugs on the wooden floors, and framed photographs on the walls. Through an archway, she could see a dining table set for supper. "I don't want to impose," Emma tried to say, but Martha waved her off. "Nonsense! You're not imposing, you're a guest. Now, let's get you out of these wet things before you catch your death." Within minutes, Emma found herself in a cheerful second-floor bedroom, wrapped in a warm robe, while her sodden clothes were whisked away to be cleaned and dried. A Mexican woman named Rosa drew her a bath in a real copper tub, and the hot water was quite possibly the most wonderful thing Emma had felt in weeks. She soaked until her shivering finally stopped, until her fingers and toes began to tingle as warmth returned to them. Through the floor she could hear voices, Colt explaining to his mother how he'd found her, Martha's exclamations of concern. The sounds were homey, comforting in a way Emma hadn't experienced since leaving Boston. When she finally emerged from the bath, she found clean clothes laid out on the bed, a simple cotton dress in soft gray, undergarments, and stockings. They were slightly too large, but Emma didn't care. They were clean and dry, and that was enough. A knock sounded on the door. "Miss Sinclair, are you decent?" Martha's voice called. "Yes, please come in." Martha entered carrying a tray with a bowl of soup, fresh bread, and tea. The smell made Emma's stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a real meal. "Thought you might appreciate something warm before coming down for supper," Martha said, setting the tray on a small table by the window. "Though, if you'd prefer to rest, I can have Rosa bring up a full meal later." "You're too kind," Emma said, her voice catching slightly. "I don't know how to thank you." Martha studied her with those keen blue eyes, so like her son's, and Emma had the uncomfortable feeling of being seen right through. But when the older woman spoke, her voice was gentle. "No thanks needed, dear. We help who we can out here. That's how folks survive in this country." She moved toward the door, then paused. "The dress fits well enough?" "It's perfect. Is it yours?" "Was my daughter's," Martha said, and something sad flickered across her face. "Catherine. She died 3 years back, fever. About your size, she was." "Oh, I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry for wearing her things," Martha interrupted firmly. "Does my heart good to see them used? Catherine would have liked that." She smiled then, warm and genuine. "You rest now, Emma. May I call you Emma?" "Please do." "Good. And you call me Martha. None of this Mrs. Dawson business. Makes me feel old. Come down when you're ready, or don't if you need sleep more than food. Either way, you're welcome here as long as you need." After Martha left, Emma ate the soup slowly, savoring every bite. It was simple fare, chicken broth with vegetables and rice, but it tasted like the finest meal she'd ever had. The bread was fresh and still warm, the tea sweet with honey. As she ate, Emma found herself studying the room. It was clearly a daughter's room, preserved with loving care. There were books on a shelf, Shakespeare, Tennyson, even some penny dreadfuls. A sampler on the wall proclaimed "God is love" in careful cross-stitch. A pressed flower in a frame sat on the dresser. Emma walked over to study a small photograph on the bedside table. A young woman, maybe 20, with Martha's strong features and Colt's eyes. She was smiling at the camera, and there was something mischievous in her expression, something that suggested she'd found humor in the serious business of sitting for a portrait. "She was beautiful," Emma whispered to the empty room. This family had lost someone they loved. They'd faced their own disasters, their own grief. Yet here they were, opening their home to a complete stranger, offering kindness without expectation of return. Emma set down the photograph and sank onto the bed. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, she felt the tight knot in her chest begin to loosen slightly. Not gone, not by a long shot, but looser, breathable. She lay back on the clean sheets, intending just to close her eyes for a moment, but exhaustion pulled her down like a riptide, and within seconds, Emma Sinclair was asleep. She woke to darkness and momentary panic. Where was she? The stagecoach? The way station? Then memory returned, along with the scent of wood smoke and faint sound of voices from downstairs. A glance at the window showed full dark outside. She'd slept for hours. Emma sat up, running her hands through her hair, which had dried into a tangled mess. There was a brush on the dresser, Catherine's brush, and Emma hesitated only a moment before using it. As she worked through the tangles, she studied her reflection in the small mirror. The woman looking back seemed like a stranger, thinner than she remembered, with shadows under her eyes and a hardness around her mouth that hadn't been there 2 months ago. When had she started looking so worn? "You've survived," she told her reflection quietly. "That's something." A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Sinclair? Emma?" It was Colt's voice, carefully respectful through the door. "Mama wanted me to check if you were awake." "There's supper if you're hungry, or we can let you sleep." Emma opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, lamplight casting his shadow long against the wall. He'd changed into clean clothes, simple canvas pants and a cotton shirt, and his dark hair was still damp from washing. He looked younger somehow, less intimidating without the hat and rain-soaked duster. "I'm sorry I slept so long," she said. "I didn't mean to." "Nothing to apologize for," Colt interrupted gently. "You needed rest, but Mama's made pot roast, and she'll be offended if you don't at least try some. Fair warning, she shows love through feeding people." Despite herself, Emma smiled. "Then I'd better not offend her." Downstairs, she found the dining table set for 3. Martha bustled in from the kitchen, carrying a platter of roast beef surrounded by potatoes and carrots, and the smell made Emma's mouth water despite the soup she'd eaten earlier. "There you are," Martha said cheerfully. "Sit, sit. You're far too thin, child. We'll have to remedy that." The meal was wonderful, simple ranch cooking, but prepared with care and served with warmth. Martha kept up a running conversation about the ranch, the neighbors, the weather, anything and everything except what Emma was doing traveling alone to Montana. Colt ate mostly in silence, but Emma caught him watching her occasionally with those thoughtful blue eyes. After dinner, they moved to the sitting room where a fire crackled cheerfully in the stone fireplace. Martha settled into her rocking chair with some mending, and Colt took a seat near the hearth, long legs stretched out toward the warmth. Emma chose the sofa, suddenly uncertain. These people had been nothing but kind, but she was still a stranger in their home. What did they expect from her? How long would they allow her to stay? And where would she go when she left? As if reading her thoughts, Martha set down her mending and looked at Emma directly. "I suppose you're wondering about your situation," she said matter-of-factly. "Colt told me about the broken stage. Thomas Greeley's a good man. He'll have it fixed by tomorrow, most likely." "Yes," Emma said quietly, "though I'm not certain where I'll be going when it is fixed." There was a pause. Martha and Colt exchanged a glance, and Emma saw some unspoken communication pass between them. "Miss Sinclair," Colt said slowly, "I don't mean to pry into your business, but if you're in some kind of trouble, maybe we can help." Emma looked down at her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. What did she owe these strangers? Nothing, certainly. But they'd shown her kindness when she desperately needed it, and something about Martha's direct gaze and Colt's gentle tone made her want to be honest. "I was supposed to be a mail-order bride," she heard herself say, "to a merchant in Silver Creek named Robert Chambers, but he died of fever before I arrived. His brother sent word that I shouldn't come, that the arrangement was canceled." Martha made a soft sound of sympathy. Colt's expression darkened. "That would be Harold Wainwright," Colt said, and there was something cold in his voice. "Robert's half-brother. Took his mother's name after she remarried. He's a piece of work, that one." "You know him?" Emma asked, surprised. "Unfortunately, he owns some land north of here, runs cattle when he feels like working. Mostly he drinks and gambles and causes trouble." Colt leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "If Harold's involved in settling Robert's estate, you're right to be cautious." "There's more," Emma said, and suddenly she wanted to tell them everything. The words came pouring out. Her father's debts, the stolen dowry money that was supposed to repay them, the disasters of the journey, her complete lack of funds or prospects. When she finished, she felt strangely lighter. as if sharing the burden had somehow made it more bearable. Martha was quiet for a long moment, her rocking chair creaking softly. Then she said, "Well, that's quite a tangle you're in, dear." "I know," Emma whispered. "I don't know what to do. I can't go back to Boston. There's nothing for me there. But I can't go forward either. I'm just stuck." "What about teaching?" Colt asked suddenly. "You said you were a teacher in Boston. We've got a small schoolhouse in town, but the last teacher left 6 months ago to get married. The children have been making do with whoever has time to spare, but it's not the same as having someone dedicated." Emma looked up at him, hope flickering in her chest. "Do you think they'd hire me?" "I think they'd be grateful to have someone qualified," Colt said. "The pay is not much, maybe $30 a month plus room and board, but it's honest work." "Or," Martha interjected, "you could stay here for a spell." When Emma started to protest, Martha held up a hand. "Hear me out. We've been managing the ranch books ourselves since Colt's father passed, but neither of us is particularly good at it. Colt can barely add 2 numbers without getting a headache, and my eyes aren't what they used to be. We could use someone with education to help sort out our accounts, write correspondence, maybe help manage supplies and orders." "I couldn't possibly," Emma began, but Martha was already warming to her idea. "You'd be earning your keep, so it's not charity. We'd pay you a fair wage, say $20 a month plus room and board. That would give you time to save some money, figure out your next steps without being rushed. And if you decide you'd rather teach, well, you'd be that much better situated to make the change." Emma looked between them, stunned. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." "We know enough," Colt said simply. "You've had a rough go of it, and you need a fresh start. We can provide that. And honestly, Miss Sinclair, we could genuinely use the help. Mama's not exaggerating about the books. They're a disaster." Emma felt tears prick at her eyes. It was too much, this unexpected kindness, this lifeline thrown when she'd been drowning. She'd knelt in the mud and said goodbye to God, convinced he'd abandoned her completely. And now, hours later, she was being offered exactly what she needed. But was it God? Or was it simply good people being decent, like Thomas Greeley had said? Did it matter? "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Martha urged gently. "Give yourself a chance, Emma. You've come all this way. Don't give up now." Emma thought about Boston, about her father's debts and her lost prospects. She thought about Robert Chambers, who she'd never known and now never would. She thought about her mother's Bible, still damp from the rain, and all the prayers that had gone unanswered. And then she thought about waking up in a warm bed, about hot soup and kind voices, about the possibility, however small, of building something new from the ruins of her old life. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I'll stay. Thank you. Thank both of you." Martha's face lit up with a smile that transformed her features from handsome to beautiful. "Wonderful. Oh, this will be good, Emma. You'll see." Colt stood and offered his hand to Emma. "Welcome to Dawson Creek Ranch, Miss Sinclair." Emma took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. "Emma, please. Just Emma." "Emma, then." He smiled, and it changed his whole face, made him look boyish despite the weathered lines around his eyes. "And you can call me Colt, seeing as we're going to be working together." As Emma settled back onto the sofa, watching the firelight dance and listening to Martha already making plans for tomorrow, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not faith. That was still too broken to name. But maybe the smallest seed of belief that things could be okay again. That she could survive this. That maybe, just maybe, the broken road had led her exactly where she needed to be. Outside, the storm was finally breaking, and through the window, Emma could see the first stars beginning to appear in the clearing sky. She turned away from them, back to the warmth of the fire and the gentle companionship of these unexpected allies, and decided that tomorrow could worry about itself. For tonight, she was safe, warm, and no longer alone. That was enough. Emma woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen below. For a moment, she lay still in Catherine's bed, watching pale morning light filter through the lace curtains, and allowed herself to simply breathe, No lurching stagecoach, no thunder of hooves or shouts of alarm, just birdsong and the distant lowing of cattle, and the peaceful sounds of a ranch coming to life. She dressed quickly in the borrowed gray dress, braided her hair with practiced efficiency, and made her way downstairs. The house was already bustling with activity. Through the kitchen doorway, she could see Martha at the stove, and a young Mexican woman, Rosa from yesterday, rolling out dough at a flour-dusted table. The warm scent of baking bread mixed with frying bacon made Emma's stomach growl audibly. "Good morning," she said from the doorway, suddenly shy. Martha turned with a wide smile, brandishing a spatula. "There you are. I was about to send Rosa to wake you. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks," Emma admitted. "Thank you again for your kindness." "Nonsense. Now sit yourself down and have some breakfast. We've got a busy day ahead if we're going to get you properly situated." Emma took a seat at the large kitchen table, and within minutes found herself presented with a plate heaping with scrambled eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, and thick slices of buttered bread. It was more food than she'd normally eat in an entire day, but Martha stood watching with her arms crossed, clearly expecting Emma to make a substantial dent in it. "Where's Colt?" Emma asked, trying to make conversation as she ate. "Out with the hands already," Martha said, returning to the stove. "Ranch work starts before dawn out here. He'll be back around midday for dinner. That's what we call lunch out west. You'll get used to our ways soon enough." As Emma ate, Rosa moved about the kitchen with quiet efficiency, and Martha kept up a steady stream of talk about the ranch, the neighbors, the quirks of frontier life. Emma learned that Dawson Creek Ranch ran about 500 head of cattle, employed 6 full-time hands plus seasonal workers, and covered nearly 3,000 acres of prime grazing land. "My husband Samuel started this place 28 years ago," Martha said, a note of pride in her voice. "We came out with nothing but 2 mules, a wagon, and more hope than sense. Lost the first cabin to fire, nearly lost our cattle to rustlers twice, and fought drought, flood, and every disaster the good Lord saw fit to send. But we built something real here, something lasting." "It must have been difficult," Emma said softly. "Losing your husband." Martha's hand stilled for a moment over the stove. 7 years this past spring, Hart gave out while he was mending fence. Colt found him. She resumed her work, but her voice was quieter now. "Samuel was a good man, hard worker, fair boss, loving father. I miss him every day. But we honor his memory by keeping this place running, by maintaining what he built." "And Catherine?" Emma asked gently. "Colt's sister?" 3 years ago, like I said, fever swept through the territory that winter, took her in less than a week." Martha's voice cracked slightly, and she cleared her throat. 22 years old, had her whole life ahead of her. She was going to marry young Peter Jameson from the neighboring ranch, Sweet Boy. He was devastated. Emma set down her fork, her own losses suddenly feeling both smaller and larger at the same time. "I'm so sorry, Martha. I can't imagine—" "You don't have to imagine, dear," Martha interrupted, turning to face her. "You've had your own losses. Your mother, from what you said last night. Your father might as well be lost, from the sound of things. Your whole life upended. We all carry grief out here. It's part of the price of living." The older woman came to sit across from Emma, her weathered hands folded on the table. "But here's what I've learned in 61 years on this earth. Grief doesn't have to destroy you. It changes you, yes. Makes you harder in some ways, softer in others. But if you let it, it can also make you stronger, more compassionate, better able to help others who are suffering." Emma felt her throat tighten. "I don't feel very strong." "Strength isn't about feeling strong," Martha said firmly. "It's about getting up each morning and doing what needs to be done, even when your heart is breaking. You've traveled 1,000 miles alone, survived robbery and illness and heartbreak, and you're still here, still fighting. That's strength, Emma Sinclair, whether you recognize it or not." Before Emma could respond, the kitchen door swung open and Colt strode in, bringing with him the smell of horses and leather and the outdoors. His boots were dusty, his shirt stained with sweat despite the early hour, but he looked vigorously alive in a way that made Emma's breath catch slightly. "Morning, Mama. Miss Sinclair?" He grabbed a biscuit from the basket on the counter, ignoring his mother's swat at his hand. "Emma," he corrected himself with a grin. "Sorry, still getting used to the informality." "How are the cattle?" Martha asked, already preparing him a plate. Good. Lost a calf to coyotes last night, but the rest of the herd's healthy. Miguel and James are moving them to the north pasture today. He dropped into a chair, accepting the plate his mother handed him. I rode by the stage road on my way back. Thomas Greeley's got the axle fixed. They'll be moving on within the hour. Emma felt a strange pang of something, not quite regret, but a recognition that a door was closing. If she'd stayed with the stage, she'd be leaving right now, heading toward Silver Creek and an uncertain future. Instead, she was here, in this warm kitchen, embarking on something entirely different. I should send a message, she said. Let Mr. Greeley know I'm staying here. He'll worry otherwise. Already done, Colt said around a mouthful of eggs. Sent Miguel down at first light with a note. Thomas will see you're taken care of. Thank you, Emma said quietly. You've thought of everything. Just trying to be helpful. Colt finished his breakfast with remarkable speed and stood. Now, if you're feeling up to it, I thought I'd show you around the ranch this morning, get you oriented. Then this afternoon we can tackle those books Mama was telling you about. Fair warning, they're a genuine disaster. Emma rose as well, her own plate clean. I'd like that. Let me just help clear these dishes first. Absolutely not, Martha said firmly. You're not hired help, Emma. You're a guest who's going to be helping with specific tasks. There's a difference. Now go on, both of you. Rosa and I have this well in hand. Colt led Emma out through the back door and into the bright morning sunshine. The ranch spread out before them in all directions. Corrals and barns, a bunkhouse for the hands, storage sheds, and beyond it all, the endless Montana sky and rolling grassland dotted with grazing cattle. It's beautiful, Emma said, shading her eyes against the sun. I've never seen so much open space. Takes some getting used to, Colt agreed. Folks from back east often feel exposed at first, all this emptiness, but you learn to love it, the freedom of it. He started walking toward the nearest barn, and Emma fell into step beside him. That's the main barn there. We keep the horses, some equipment, feed stores. The smaller building is the tack room. Beyond that is the smokehouse, and that low structure is the root cellar. As they walked, ranch hands tipped their hats to Emma, their curious glances quickly mastered when Colt introduced her as their new bookkeeper. She met Miguel, the ranch foreman, a compact man in his 40s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. James, a lanky young cowboy who couldn't have been more than 19. Old Pete, who'd worked for Samuel Dawson since the beginning and had a weathered face that looked like carved leather. Miss Sinclair's going to be helping straighten out our accounts, Colt explained to each of them, and probably discovering we've been doing everything wrong for years. About time someone who can actually cipher took over, Old Pete said with a gap-toothed grin. No offense, boss, but you add like a man who learned his numbers from a whiskey bottle. Colt laughed, taking the ribbing good-naturedly. None taken, Pete. It's God's honest truth. They continued the tour, Colt explaining the daily rhythms of ranch life, the early morning feeding, the constant fence maintenance, the seasonal roundups and brandings, the delicate balance of managing grazing land and water rights. Emma listened intently, fascinated by this world so different from her Boston classroom. How many people work here, she asked as they walked along a fence line. Depends on the season. 6 full-time hands year-round, Miguel, James, Pete, and 3 others you haven't met yet. During roundup and branding, we hire on maybe 10 more. And Rosa helps Mama with the house and cooking. He paused to test a fence post, frowning at the slight give. Need to replace this section soon, he muttered to himself. It's a lot of responsibility, Emma observed, managing all this. It is, Colt agreed. Some days I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water. Papa made it look easy, but he had 30 years of experience. I'm still learning. He glanced at her. That's why we genuinely do need your help, Emma. I'm not just offering you charity. Our books are a mess, our correspondence is behind, and I'm pretty sure we're losing money somewhere, but I can't figure out where. They had reached a small hill overlooking the ranch, and Colt stopped, gazing out over the land. Emma stood beside him, and for a moment they were both quiet, just taking in the view. Can I ask you something? Emma said finally. Of course. Yesterday, when you found me, you said you'd made your own goodbyes to God. What did you mean? Colt was quiet for so long that Emma thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and distant. I fought in the war, Confederate Army, much to my shame now. I was young and stupid and believed in causes that didn't deserve believing in. He picked up a rock and threw it hard, watching it arc through the air. I saw things in that war, Emma. Did things. Men blown apart by artillery. Boys my age dying in agony, crying for their mothers. And I prayed constantly. Begged God to end it, to save my friends, to make sense of the senselessness. He took a breath. When the war ended, I came home broken. Couldn't sleep without nightmares. Jumped at loud noises. Couldn't stand to be in crowds. Papa didn't know what to do with me. Catherine tried to help, but I pushed everyone away. And I was angry, so angry at God. Angry that he'd let the war happen, let good men die, let me survive when better men didn't. Emma waited, not speaking, letting him work through the memory. I stopped going to church, stopped praying, stopped believing there was any order or purpose to the universe. Figured we were all just stumbling through darkness, making the best of a bad situation. Colt turned to look at her then, his blue eyes serious. That lasted about 3 years. Then one winter we had a terrible blizzard, worst I'd ever seen. Cattle scattered everywhere. We were out trying to round them up before they froze or got picked off by wolves. I got separated from the others. Couldn't see more than 5 feet in any direction. My horse went lame and I knew I was in real trouble. Started to accept that I was going to die out there, and part of me was almost relieved. Figured it was what I deserved anyway. But then I heard it, a cowbell. One of our cattle, wearing the bell we put on the lead steer. I followed that sound through the storm, and it led me straight back to the ranch. I found out later that Bell had fallen off 2 days before the storm. Miguel had meant to put it back on, but forgot. That bell should have been in the tack room, but somehow it was out there, ringing in the storm, leading me home. Emma felt goosebumps rise on her arms. You think God put it there? I don't know, Colt said honestly. Maybe. Or maybe it was just chance. The steer still had the bell's leather strap on. It got caught on something, started ringing in the wind. But standing in that barn afterward, warming myself by the fire, I realized something. Whether it was God or chance, I'd been given another opportunity, another chance to live, to matter, to do something worthwhile with my broken life. And I could either waste it being angry and bitter, or I could accept it and try to be better. He looked back out over the ranch. So I started over, not with blind faith like I had as a boy, but with something quieter, a willingness to believe that maybe there's purpose in the chaos, that maybe we're not alone, even when it feels like we are. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know if I can get there, she whispered. Back to belief. You don't have to, Colt said gently. Not today, not tomorrow, maybe not ever. But Emma, you also don't have to carry your anger and grief alone. That's what I'm trying to say. You've got people now, Mama and me, we're not going anywhere. You can doubt and question and rage all you want. We'll still be here. Something in Emma's chest, that tight, painful knot that had been there since Boston, loosened just a fraction. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Come on, Colt said, his tone lightening. Let me show you the office where you'll be working. Maybe seeing the state of our books will distract you from theological questions. The ranch office was a small room off the main house parlor, and Colt hadn't been exaggerating about the state of the books. Papers were stacked haphazardly on every surface. Ledgers lay open to random pages, some with entries from 6 months ago. Bills and receipts were stuffed into drawers with no apparent organization. A thick layer of dust covered everything. Good Lord, Emma breathed, standing in the doorway. Told you it was bad, Colt said sheepishly. Papa handled all this before he died. He had a system, not a good system, but a system. After he passed, Catherine tried to take it over, but then she got sick. Since then, Mama and I have just been surviving, paying bills when they seem urgent, making deposits when we remember, hoping for the best. Emma moved into the room, her teacher's instinct for organization immediately assessing the situation. This is going to take more than an afternoon. Take as long as you need, days, weeks, whatever. Colt cleared a chair for her, dust motes dancing in the sunlight. Just let me know what you need, more paper, ink, file boxes, whatever. We'll get it. Emma picked up the nearest ledger and flipped through it. The entries were sporadic, some in Samuel's neat hand, some in what must have been Catherine's elegant script, and recent ones in Colt's cramped, almost illegible writing. Numbers didn't balance, transactions were recorded without dates. Some pages were stained with what looked like coffee. "First things first," she said, her mind already working. "I need to establish a proper filing system. Then I'll work backward through the ledgers, reconcile what I can, and create a current accounting. After that, I can start tracking ongoing expenses and income properly." Colt grinned. "I have no idea what most of those words mean, but you sound confident, so I'm going to trust you." "It's basic bookkeeping," Emma said, warming to the task despite the overwhelming chaos. "The same principles I used to manage the school's accounts in Boston, just significantly more complicated because there's livestock and land and equipment instead of textbooks and chalk." "Whatever you say, teacher." Colt moved toward the door. "I'll leave you to it. Holler if you need anything." "Wait," Emma called out. He turned back. "Thank you, Colt, for everything. For finding me yesterday, for bringing me here, for giving me work and purpose when I desperately needed both. I know I can't repay you properly, but—" "Emma," he interrupted gently, "you're not in my debt. We're helping each other, that's all. You're giving us something we need just as much as we're giving you shelter. It's an equal exchange." After he left, Emma stood alone in the dusty office and felt something stir inside her that she hadn't felt in weeks: purpose. She might not have faith anymore, might not understand God's plan, or even believe there was one. But she could organize chaos into order. She could make sense of numbers and accounts. She could do this one concrete, achievable thing. She rolled up her sleeves, tied back her hair with a ribbon Rosa had given her, and got to work. The afternoon passed in a blur of papers and ledgers and careful notations. Emma created categories, sorted documents by date, and began the painstaking process of tracking the ranch's financial history. She discovered that they were actually more solvent than Colt feared. There was money in their account that no one had bothered to properly record, but she also found concerning patterns of missing documentation and what looked like several unpaid bills that had been overlooked. Martha brought her tea and sandwiches at some point. Rosa came to light a lamp when the sun began to set, but Emma barely noticed, lost in the familiar comfort of numbers and organization. It was full dark when Colt knocked on the open door, making her jump. "Easy," he said, hands raised in apology. "Didn't mean to startle you, but Mama sent me to tell you supper's ready, and she says if you don't come eat, she'll drag you out by your ear." Emma blinked, surprised to find the lamp burning beside her and night pressed against the windows. "What time is it?" "Nearly 8 o'clock. You've been in here for 6 hours straight." "Oh." Emma looked around at the office, which now showed the first signs of organization. Papers in neat stacks, ledgers arranged chronologically, a list of questions and concerns written in her careful script. "I lost track of time." "That's what Mama said you'd say." Colt leaned against the doorframe, studying her. "Find anything interesting?" "Several things. Some good, some concerning. I'll prepare a proper report once I've worked through everything, but Colt—" She hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "You're not in danger of losing the ranch or anything dramatic, but you are paying for some services you're not receiving, and there are at least 3 bills here that should have been paid months ago." He winced. "I was afraid of that. We'll talk more tomorrow. For now, come eat before Mama makes good on her threat." Dinner was fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and biscuits so light they practically floated off the plate. Emma ate with an appetite she hadn't felt in months, listening to Martha and Colt discuss ranch business with easy familiarity. It was domestic and comfortable and entirely foreign to Emma's experience. Her life in Boston had been quiet, restrained. Her father's house had been full of books, but empty of warmth after her mother died. Meals were silent affairs, prayer perfunctory. This cheerful chaos, this easy affection between mother and son, was something new. "You've got gravy on your chin," Martha told Colt matter-of-factly. He wiped it away with his napkin, grinning. "Can't help it. You make the best gravy in Montana. Flattery won't get you out of fixing that fence tomorrow. Worth a try." After supper, they moved to the parlor again. Martha worked on her mending while Colt read through some Cattle Association newsletter, and Emma found herself drawn to the bookshelf. It was an eclectic collection: agricultural manuals, some classic literature, several adventure novels, and a worn family Bible. She pulled out a copy of Shakespeare's sonnets and settled into the corner of the sofa. The familiar words were comforting, even if some of the sentiments about love and faith now rang hollow to her cynical heart. "Catherine loved that book," Martha said quietly, glancing up from her sewing. She used to read them aloud sometimes, said they made her feel sophisticated. "She had good taste," Emma said, running her fingers over the worn cover. "She would have liked you," Colt added, not looking up from his newsletter. "She always wanted a sister, someone to talk books with, share secrets. I wasn't much use in that department." Emma felt a strange pang, grief for a girl she'd never known, mixed with longing for the friendship that might have been. "I wish I could have met her." "Me too," Martha said softly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each absorbed in their own tasks. Outside, nightbirds called and somewhere a dog barked. Emma felt herself relaxing into the peaceful rhythm of it, her body finally releasing the constant tension she'd carried for weeks. "Emma," Martha said eventually, "I hope you don't mind my asking, but what about your father? Will he worry, not hearing from you?" Emma closed the book, her fingers marking the page. "I don't know. I sent a telegram from the last way station, telling him I'd arrived safely in Montana. That was before I received the news about Robert. I suppose I should write him again, let him know my situation has changed." "But?" Colt prompted, clearly hearing the hesitation in her voice. "But I'm angry with him," Emma admitted. "He gambled away everything we had, then sold my future to pay his debts without even consulting me. He sent me 1,000 miles away to marry a stranger, and his last words to me were to trust in God." She heard the bitterness in her own voice. "I don't know what to say to him now." Martha set down her mending, her expression thoughtful. "Anger is natural, dear. He wronged you, no question about that. But he's still your father, still the only family you have left in the world." "Is he, though?" Emma couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "He chose his gambling debts over my welfare. He shipped me off to solve his problems. That doesn't feel much like family." "No, it doesn't," Colt agreed, surprising her. Martha shot him a look, but he continued. "Emma's got a right to her anger, Mama. Not everything can be forgiven just because it's family." "I didn't say it could," Martha replied firmly, "but holding on to anger is like holding on to hot coals. Eventually, you're the one who gets burned." She looked at Emma kindly. "I'm not saying you need to forgive him today or tomorrow or even next year, but maybe write him a letter. Just tell him you're safe and settled. Not for his sake, for yours. So you don't have to carry the worry about what he's thinking or feeling." Emma considered this. The idea of writing to her father made her chest tight with complicated emotions. But Martha had a point. As long as she left him in uncertainty, she was tied to him by that uncertainty. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "That's all I ask." Martha returned to her sewing, and the conversation drifted to other topics: the upcoming harvest festival in town, the new family that had moved into the east, the price of cattle fluctuating again. Later, as Emma lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she thought about her father, about the man he'd been before her mother died, steady, faithful, full of gentle wisdom. And about the man he'd become after, desperate, weak, reaching for anything to fill the void. She'd been so angry, so hurt by his betrayal, but for the first time she wondered if maybe he'd been drowning too, just like her. If maybe his faith had shattered when Mama died, and he'd been flailing ever since, making terrible choices out of his own brokenness. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but maybe, eventually, it could help her understand it. The days settled into a rhythm after that. Emma rose early, helped Martha with breakfast, then spent her mornings in the office untangling the ranch's accounts. The work was challenging but satisfying, and she found herself looking forward to the daily victories. A ledger balanced, a missing payment tracked down, a vendor's overcharge identified and corrected. Afternoon she spent learning the broader operations of the ranch. Colt taught her to ride astride instead of side saddle, explaining that the latter was impractical for ranch work. She helped Martha in the garden, learning which plants thrived in Montana's climate. She wrote letters to suppliers and cattle buyers, her educated hand and proper grammar immediately improving the ranch's professional correspondence. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Emma began to heal. It wasn't dramatic. There was no moment of revelation or sudden return to faith. but the sharp edges of her grief and anger began to dull. The nightmares about the journey west came less frequently. She found herself laughing at Colt's terrible jokes, enjoying Martha's stories about the early days of the ranch, taking pleasure in simple things like fresh bread or a beautiful sunset. 3 weeks after her arrival, Emma was in the office when she heard horses approaching the house at speed. Through the window, she saw 2 men riding up, strangers by the look of them. One was older, perhaps 50, with a florid face and expensive clothes that looked out of place on the frontier. The other was younger, lean and hard-eyed with the look of hired muscle. Emma felt a chill of premonition as Colt emerged from the barn to meet them. She moved to the parlor where she could hear the conversation through the open window. "Afternoon," Colt said, his voice carefully neutral. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" "You must be Colton Dawson," the older man said. His voice was cultured but with an unpleasant edge. "I'm Harold Wainwright. This is my associate, Mr. Pike. I'm looking for a young woman who is supposed to marry my late brother Robert, Emma Sinclair. I have reason to believe she may be in this area." Emma's blood ran cold. She moved back from the window, her heart pounding. "What makes you think she'd be here?" Colt asked. "Because the stage driver, Thomas Greeley, told me she left the broken stage in the company of someone from Dawson Creek Ranch. Don't play games with me, Mr. Dawson. Is she here or not?" There was a pause, and Emma held her breath. "And if she is," Colt said slowly, "what business is it of yours? I was under the impression the marriage arrangement was canceled after your brother's death." "The arrangement, yes," Wainwright said, and Emma could hear the smirk in his voice. "But there are certain financial matters that need to be settled. Miss Sinclair's father borrowed a substantial sum against her dowry, $500 to be precise. With Robert dead, that debt defaults to Miss Sinclair personally. I've taken over my brother's estate, which means the debt is now owed to me." Emma felt the room spin. $500. It might as well have been 5,000. She could never repay that kind of money. "You rode all the way out here to collect a debt from a woman who's just lost her intended husband?" Colt's voice was cold. "That's low, even for you, Wainwright. Business is business. Now I can be reasonable. If Miss Sinclair can't pay in cash, we can certainly work out an alternative arrangement." "No." Colt's voice was flat and hard. "Whatever you're suggesting, the answer is no. Miss Sinclair is under the protection of this ranch, and you'll treat her with respect or you'll leave. Immediately." "Protection?" Wainwright laughed, an ugly sound. "How noble. But protection doesn't pay debts, Mr. Dawson. I have a legal contract signed by Joseph Sinclair. The money is owed, and I intend to collect it, one way or another. Now, I'm going to speak with Miss Sinclair directly." "Where is she?" Emma couldn't let Colt fight this battle alone. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and walked out onto the porch. "I'm here, Mr. Wainwright," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "and I'm quite capable of speaking for myself." Harold Wainwright turned at the sound of Emma's voice, and she immediately understood why Colt had spoken of him with such distaste. There was something predatory in the way his eyes traveled over her, assessing her worth like livestock at auction. His expensive suit couldn't hide the weakness in his jaw or the cruel set of his mouth. "Miss Sinclair," he said, removing his hat with exaggerated courtesy, "how unfortunate that we meet under such circumstances. Please accept my condolences on the loss of my dear brother." The words were correct, but his tone made them mockery. Emma descended the porch steps slowly, acutely aware of Colt moving to stand beside her, a solid presence at her shoulder. "Thank you, Mr. Wainwright," she said carefully. "Though I confess I'm confused about this debt you mention. The marriage arrangement was made between my father and your brother. With Robert's death, surely nothing," Wainwright interrupted, pulling a folded document from his jacket. "This is the contract your father signed. It clearly states that $500 was advanced against your dowry to be repaid through your marriage to Robert. The contract also includes a clause. Here, let me read it. Should the marriage fail to occur for any reason, the advance sum becomes due immediately, payable by the party of the first part or his assigns." He smiled, and it made Emma's skin crawl. "Your father is the party of the first part. You, my dear, are his assign. The debt is legally yours." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. "But I have no means to repay such a sum. You must know that." "I'm aware of your situation, yes, which is why I'm prepared to be generous." Wainwright stepped closer, and Emma fought the urge to retreat. I need someone to manage my household. Cook, clean, see to domestic matters. It's hard to find good help out here. You could work off the debt, let's say 2 years of service at fair wages. That would settle the account nicely. 2 years? Emma's voice came out sharper than she intended. At what wages, exactly? Oh, $10 a month should suffice, plus room and board, naturally. Emma's mind raced through the calculation. $10 a month for 24 months was only $240, less than half what was supposedly owed. That doesn't even cover half the debt. Wainwright's smile widened. Well, we'd have to factor in the cost of your room and board, wouldn't we? And there would be interest on the remaining balance. These things add up. In other words, Colt said coldly, you'd keep her in perpetual servitude, always owing more than she could repay. I prefer to think of it as providing opportunity, Wainwright replied smoothly. Though if Miss Sinclair has another means of repayment, I'm certainly open to discussion. The implied suggestion in his tone made Emma's stomach turn. Before she could respond, Martha appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. What's all this commotion? She demanded, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. When she spotted Wainwright, her expression hardened. Harold Wainwright, I should have known. What lies are you peddling today? Mrs. Dawson, Wainwright said, his courtesy becoming strained. I'm simply conducting business with Miss Sinclair. This doesn't concern you. Everything that happens on my property concerns me, Martha shot back. And I know your kind of business, Harold. You're a snake, just like your father was. Now state your business plainly and be done with it, or get off my land. Wainwright's facade of politeness cracked slightly. Fine. Miss Sinclair owes me $500. I'm offering her terms. If she refuses, I'll take the matter to the circuit judge when he arrives next month. He'll rule in my favor, the contract is ironclad, and then she'll face debtor's prison or worse. Debtor's prison? Emma whispered. She'd heard of such things, but never imagined she'd face that threat herself. Montana doesn't have debtor's prison, Colt said firmly. That's an empty threat. Perhaps not prison, Wainwright conceded, but the judge can order her property seized, her wages garnished. He can make her life very difficult, Mr. Dawson. I'm offering her a reasonable alternative. Reasonable, Martha scoffed. 2 years of servitude for a debt she didn't incur. That's slavery, Harold, and you know it. It's legal, Wainwright countered, and it's generous, considering I could simply demand immediate payment and let the law handle the consequences. He turned back to Emma, his eyes cold despite his smile. You have until the circuit judge arrives. 6 weeks from today. Either repay the debt in full, agree to my terms, or face legal consequences. Those are your options, Miss Sinclair. He replaced his hat and moved toward his horse. His companion, Pike, who hadn't spoken throughout the exchange, followed like a silent shadow. Before mounting, Wainwright looked back at Emma one more time. Oh, and Miss Sinclair? I should mention that as Robert's heir, I'm also in possession of certain letters, correspondence between you and my brother. Quite personal, some of them. It would be a shame if those became public. People might get the wrong impression about your character. The threat was clear. Emma felt rage surge through her, hot and cleansing after the cold fear. How dare you? 6 weeks, Wainwright interrupted. Consider my offer carefully. It's the best you're going to get. He and Pike rode off at a leisurely pace, leaving a wake of dust and fury behind them. Emma stood frozen, her mind reeling. $500. 6 weeks. Impossible choices. She felt the earth tilting beneath her feet, all the fragile peace she'd built over the past weeks crumbling like sand castles against the tide. Emma. Colt's hand was on her arm, steadying her. Come inside, we need to talk. She let him guide her into the house, barely aware of moving. Martha was already brewing tea, her face set in determined lines. They settled around the kitchen table, and Emma found herself staring at the worn wood grain, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That contract, she said finally. Could it really be legal? Could a judge actually enforce it? Unfortunately, yes, Colt said heavily. Montana territory law recognizes contracts. If your father signed that document, and if it includes the language Wainwright quoted, and knowing Harold, it probably does, then technically the debt exists. But surely there's some way to challenge it, Martha insisted. The circumstances don't matter under the law, Colt finished. I've seen similar cases. Unless we can prove fraud or coercion in the original agreement, the contract stands. Emma felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. She'd cried enough these past weeks. Then what do I do? I don't have $500. I don't have $50. My wages here wouldn't even cover the debt in 2 years, let alone 6 weeks. We could loan you the money, Martha said immediately. No. Emma's voice was firm despite her shaking hands. Absolutely not. You've already done more than enough for me. I won't take your money on top of everything else. Emma, be reasonable. I am being reasonable, Emma interrupted, looking between them. You've given me shelter and work and kindness, but this debt is mine, or rather, my father's, but it's fallen to me regardless. I can't ask you to pay for his mistakes. Colt was quiet, his jaw working like he was chewing on thoughts too bitter to voice. Finally, he stood abruptly, pacing to the window. There might be another way, he said slowly, not looking at them. What way? Martha asked. Colt turned back, and Emma saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Determination mixed with fear, resolve fighting with uncertainty. Marriage, he said. If Emma married me, her debts would become mine under territorial law. I could pay off Wainwright, and as my wife, Emma would be legally protected from any further claims he might make. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the mantel clock. Emma stared at Colt, certain she'd misheard. Marry you? She whispered. It makes sense, Colt said, speaking faster now, as if trying to convince himself as much as her. You need legal protection and financial security. The ranch needs help with management and accounts. We work well together. We respect each other. That's more than a lot of marriages have. Colt, Martha said carefully, this is a serious decision. You can't just, I know it's serious, Mama. Colt's eyes never left Emma's face. I've been thinking about it for a while now, actually. Before Wainwright showed up today. Emma's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. You've been thinking about marrying me? Is that so surprising? A hint of his usual humor flickered across Colt's face. You're intelligent, capable, kind when you want to be. You make my mother laugh. The ranch hands respect you. And Emma, his voice softened. I like having you here. I like talking with you, working beside you. I like the way you argue when you think I'm wrong about something, and the way you concentrate when you're working through a problem. I like you. Liking someone isn't the same as loving them, Emma said, but her voice was shaking. No, it's not, Colt agreed. But it's a better foundation than many marriages start with. And maybe, he hesitated, vulnerability clear in his expression now, maybe over time it could become something more. Or maybe it stays comfortable companionship and partnership. Either way, you'd be safe, protected. You could build a real life here instead of running from debts or serving Wainwright like an indentured servant. Emma looked at Martha, searching for guidance, but the older woman's expression was carefully neutral. This is your decision, dear, Martha said quietly. Both of yours. I won't interfere except to say that Colt's right about one thing. You work well together, and he's a good man. He'd treat you with respect and kindness, always. But would I be trapping him? Emma turned back to Colt. Forcing him into marriage out of obligation? That's not fair to you. You're not forcing me into anything, Colt said firmly. He crossed back to the table, kneeling beside her chair so their eyes were level. Emma, I know this isn't romantic. I know it's not the marriage you imagined when you left Boston, but it could be good, real. We could make it work. Why? Emma asked desperately. Why would you do this for me? Colt was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was low and honest. Because when I found you kneeling in that mud, saying goodbye to God, I saw myself. Saw who I'd been after the war, broken and lost and convinced there was no path forward. Someone helped me find my way back. My family, this ranch, the quiet work of building something meaningful. Maybe I can help you find your way too, and maybe, he smiled slightly, maybe you can help me keep finding mine. Emma felt tears spilling down her cheeks now, but they weren't tears of despair. They were something more complicated, Grief and hope and fear and gratitude all tangled together. "I don't love you," she said, needing him to understand. "I don't even know if I'm capable of that kind of love anymore. Everything feels broken inside me." "I know," Colt said gently. "I'm not asking for love, Emma. I'm asking for partnership, for trust, for a chance to build something together." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused, steady and real. "Marry me. Not because you owe me, not because you have no choice, but because maybe we could make each other's lives better." Emma looked down at their joined hands. 6 weeks ago, she'd been traveling to marry a stranger out of duty and desperation. Now she was being offered marriage again, but this time from someone she knew. Someone who'd shown her kindness without expectation. Someone who made her laugh despite everything. Who challenged her mind. Who seemed to genuinely value her presence. It wasn't love, but maybe Colt was right. Maybe it was something better, something real and honest, and built on mutual respect rather than romantic fantasy. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "I need you to understand something. I can't promise to be the wife you might want someday. I'm damaged, Colt. My faith is shattered. My ability to trust is compromised. I might never be whole again." "None of us are whole," Colt replied. "We're all damaged in some way. The question is whether we're damaged alone or damaged together." He squeezed her hand gently. "Say yes, Emma. Give us both a chance." She looked into his blue eyes and saw no deception, no hidden agenda, just honest hope and quiet strength and a willingness to take a risk on someone as broken as herself. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Colt's smile transformed his face, and for just a moment Emma saw the young man he must have been before war and loss carved lines around his eyes. He stood, pulling her up with him, and before she quite knew what was happening, he'd wrapped her in a careful embrace. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair. "I promise you won't regret this." Emma let herself lean into the embrace, drawing strength from his solid presence. She didn't know if he was right about not regretting it, but she knew she was choosing the best option available, and choosing it freely rather than having it forced upon her. That had to count for something. Martha was wiping her eyes with her apron, smiling through tears. "Well," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I suppose we have a wedding to plan, though we'll need to do it quickly if we're going to beat Wainwright's deadline." "How quickly can we arrange it?" Colt asked, finally releasing Emma but keeping one hand on her arm as if afraid she might bolt. "The circuit preacher comes through in 2 weeks, Martha said. "We could have it then, if Emma's agreeable." 2 weeks. Emma felt panic flutter in her chest. 2 weeks to prepare for marriage to a man she'd known for less than a month. It was insane, reckless, completely impractical. 2 weeks is fine, she heard herself say. The next 14 days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Martha threw herself into planning with the enthusiasm of a woman who'd thought she might never see her son married. Emma protested that a simple ceremony would be sufficient, but Martha wouldn't hear of it. "You may not have the wedding you dreamed of as a girl," Martha said firmly, "but you'll have a proper one nonetheless. My son's marriage is worth celebrating." Word spread quickly through the neighboring ranches and the small town of Clearwater, 5 miles away. People Emma had never met sent gifts. A set of hand-embroidered pillowcases, a quilt pieced together by the church ladies, preserves and smoked meats to stock the couple's household. The generosity overwhelmed her, particularly from strangers who owed her nothing. "That's frontier hospitality," Rosa explained as she helped Emma sort through the gifts. "Everyone knows how hard life is out here. We take care of each other." Colt continued his ranch work, but made time each evening to sit with Emma on the front porch, talking about their expectations for the marriage. They were awkward conversations, both of them dancing around intimate topics, but Emma appreciated his efforts to establish understanding. "I'm not expecting," Colt said one evening, his ears reddening slightly. "That is, I don't assume that you'll... What I mean is, we can take our time, with the more personal aspects of marriage. I won't rush you." Emma felt her own face heating. "Thank you. That's considerate." "It's just decent," Colt replied. "You've had enough people making demands of you. I won't be another one." They discussed practical matters too, where they would live. Colt had been staying in the main house with Martha, but there was a smaller cottage on the property, originally built for the ranch foreman. It had been empty since Miguel's wife passed, and he'd moved into the bunkhouse with the other hands. "We could fix it up," Colt suggested. "Make it our own place. Give us privacy while still being close enough to help Mama." Emma liked that idea. The cottage would be theirs. A fresh start in a new space, not haunted by memories of Catherine or Samuel. The dress proved more complicated. Emma had no money for a new gown, and her ruined blue calico was beyond repair. Martha offered her own wedding dress, but when they brought it out from storage, they discovered moths had gotten to it. 30 years in a trunk, Martha sighed, holding up the lace that crumbled at her touch. "I should have taken better care of it." "What about Catherine's things?" Emma asked hesitantly. "I've been wearing her dresses. Would it be wrong to use something of hers for the wedding?" Martha's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Catherine would love that. She was always romantic about weddings. She'd be thrilled to be part of yours." They found a beautiful blue dress in Catherine's wardrobe. Simpler than a traditional wedding gown, but elegant nonetheless. Rosa took it in at the waist and let down the hem, and Martha contributed lace from her ruined dress for the collar and cuffs. The result was something between old and new, borrowed and blue, a dress that seemed to embody Emma's strange journey to this moment. 5 days before the wedding, Emma sat down and finally wrote to her father. The letter took hours to compose, going through several drafts before she found words that felt honest without being cruel. "Dear Papa," she wrote, "I am writing to inform you that I am safe and well in Montana Territory. The marriage arrangement with Robert Chambers ended due to his untimely death from fever. However, I have found employment keeping accounts for a ranch, and I am learning to build a life here. I do not know when or if I will return to Boston. I hope you are well, and that Uncle Henry is taking good care of you. I will write again when I am able. Your daughter, Emma." She didn't mention the debt, didn't mention her anger or hurt, didn't mention that she was about to marry a man she barely knew to escape the consequences of her father's mistakes. Let him think she was simply making her way in the world. Maybe someday she'd be ready to say more. The night before the wedding, Martha insisted Emma stay in the main house while Colt moved his things to the cottage. They'd prepared it together over the past week, scrubbing floors, painting walls, hanging curtains Rosa had sewn. It was modest but cozy, with a main room that served as kitchen and parlor, a small bedroom, and a root cellar. Martha had contributed furniture, Rosa had added colorful rugs and pottery, and the other ranch hands had built a new bed frame as their wedding gift. Emma lay in Catherine's bed for the last time, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was making a terrible mistake. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Colton Dawson. She would be legally bound to a man she didn't love, living a life she'd never imagined for herself. But she wouldn't be running anymore, wouldn't be desperately alone, wouldn't be at the mercy of men like Harold Wainwright. That had to be worth something. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Emma, are you awake?" Martha's voice. "Yes, come in." Martha entered carrying 2 glasses and a bottle. "Elderberry wine," she explained, settling into the chair by the window. "I made it last summer. Seems like a good night to share it." She poured them each a glass, and they sipped in comfortable silence for a while. "You're afraid," Martha said finally. It wasn't a question. "Terrified," Emma admitted. "Of Colt? He'd never hurt you, Emma. I promise you that." "I know, it's not him I'm afraid of." Emma struggled to articulate the fear clawing at her insides. "I'm afraid of failing, of not being able to be the wife he deserves, of staying broken forever." Martha was quiet for a long moment. Then she set down her glass and moved to sit on the edge of the bed, taking Emma's hand. "Let me tell you something about marriage," she said. "It's not about being perfect or whole or healed. It's about showing up every day and choosing each other, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Samuel and I had plenty of rough years, times when we could barely stand to be in the same room. But we kept choosing each other, kept working at it, and eventually we built something strong enough to weather any storm." "But you loved him," Emma protested. "Colt and I—" "Love can come from respect and partnership," Martha interrupted gently. "Not every marriage starts with romance, Emma, but the ones that last are built on something sturdier than passion, on trust and commitment and the daily work of building a life together. You and Colt have the foundation. The rest can grow from there. And if it doesn't? Emma whispered. If I can never love him the way he deserves? Then you'll still have companionship and partnership and mutual care, Martha said firmly. That's more than many people get, dear. Don't discount it just because it's not what fairy tales promised you. Emma felt something ease in her chest. Martha was right. She'd been measuring this marriage against some impossible standard of romantic love, when what Colt was offering was something more practical and perhaps more valuable, a real partnership, honestly entered into, with clear expectations and mutual benefit. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything, for taking me in, for treating me like family, for raising a son who would offer marriage to a broken stranger. You're not a stranger anymore, Martha said, squeezing her hand. Tomorrow you become my daughter, not by blood, but by choice, and that counts just as much. After Martha left, Emma finished her wine and finally drifted into uneasy sleep. She dreamed of muddy roads and thunderstorms, of her father's disappointed face and her mother's fading smile, of a cowbell ringing through a blizzard. When she woke, dawn was breaking and her wedding day had arrived. Rosa came early to help with her hair and dress. Martha brought breakfast on a tray, though Emma could barely eat. By mid-morning, wagons and horses began arriving from neighboring ranches and town. Emma watched from the window as the ranch yard filled with people, far more than she'd expected. Everyone comes to weddings, Rosa explained, pinning flowers into Emma's braided hair. It's an excuse to celebrate, to forget hard work for a day. And everyone is curious about you, the mysterious Eastern woman who captured Colt's heart. I didn't capture anything, Emma murmured, but Rosa just laughed. That's not how they see it. To them, this is a romantic story. Mail-order bride loses her intended, is rescued by handsome rancher, falls in love. Like a dime novel. If only they knew the truth, Emma thought, but perhaps it was better this way. Let them have their romantic story. Reality was complicated enough without trying to explain it to curious neighbors. At noon, the circuit preacher arrived. A weathered man named Reverend Walsh, who'd been marrying and burying and baptizing Montana settlers for 20 years. He greeted Emma with kind eyes and asked if she was entering this marriage freely. Yes, she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. Not freely in the sense of having unlimited choices, but freely in the sense of choosing the best available option with clear eyes and honest intent. The ceremony was held outside under the wide Montana sky. Someone had strung lanterns between fence posts and scattered wildflowers across the grass. Ranch hands stood shoulder to shoulder with town merchants and neighboring ranchers. Martha presided over everything with quiet joy, her son's happiness written clear across her face. Emma walked from the house alone. She'd briefly considered asking old Pete or Miguel to give her away, but something in her rebelled at the symbolism. She wasn't being given from one man to another. She was choosing this, walking into it on her own feet. Colt waited at the makeshift altar, really just a wooden arch that James and the other young hands had decorated with pine boughs and ribbons. He wore his best clothes, his hair still damp from washing, and when he saw Emma approaching, the look on his face stopped her breath. It was awe, pure and simple. Not desire or possession or satisfaction, but genuine wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe his luck. You look beautiful, he said when she reached him, his voice quiet enough that only she could hear. Like grace itself. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever looked at her like that before, like she was precious, valuable, worth treasuring. Thank you, she whispered. Reverend Walsh began the ceremony with a prayer that Emma couldn't focus on. She was too aware of Colt standing beside her, of his hand reaching for hers, of the weight of the moment settling onto her shoulders. When it came time for vows, she listened to Colt's voice, steady and sure, promising to honor and cherish her, to provide for her, to stand beside her through whatever came. Then it was her turn. She looked into those blue eyes that had first found her in the storm and spoke the words that would bind them together. I, Emma Rose Sinclair, take you, Colton James Dawson, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to respect you, to work beside you, to build a life with you in honesty and trust. In times of plenty and times of want, in joy and in sorrow, I will stand with you, This is my vow." She'd written the vows herself, unable to speak of love she didn't feel, but willing to promise the things she could offer: respect, honesty, partnership. If Colt was disappointed by the omission of love, his face didn't show it. He smiled at her, warm and genuine, and squeezed her hands gently. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Walsh intoned, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Young man, you may kiss your bride." Colt leaned in slowly, giving Emma time to pull away if she wanted. But she didn't. She let him kiss her gently, sweetly, his lips warm against hers for just a moment before he pulled back. The gathered crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Someone struck up a fiddle, and suddenly the ranch yard transformed into a celebration. Tables appeared laden with food that neighbors had brought. Someone rolled out a barrel of beer. The music shifted to something lively, and people began to dance. Emma found herself swept into the festivities, passed from one well-wisher to another, receiving congratulations and advice and countless blessings. It was overwhelming, but also heartwarming. This community of near strangers celebrating her marriage as if she'd lived among them for years. Martha caught Emma during a lull in the congratulations, pressing a cool glass of lemonade into her hand. "Drink," she commanded gently. "You look flushed. It's a lot to take in, isn't it?" Emma nodded, grateful for the momentary respite from the crush of well-wishers. Her cheeks ached from smiling, and her hand was sore from being shaken by what felt like half the territory. "I didn't expect so many people." "Weddings are community affairs out here," Martha said, her eyes scanning the crowd with obvious satisfaction. "Everyone's eager to meet you properly. You're one of us now, Emma, Mrs. Colton Dawson of Dawson Creek Ranch. That means something in these parts." Mrs. Colton Dawson. The name felt foreign on Emma's tongue, like borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit. She watched Colt across the yard, surrounded by ranchers and cowboys, accepting their ribbing and congratulations with easy grace. He caught her eye and smiled, and Emma managed to smile back, though her stomach was tight with nerves about what came after the celebration ended. "There you are," a cheerful voice interrupted her thoughts. A young woman about Emma's age approached, pretty and blonde with a friendly smile. "I'm Sarah Jameson from the Triple J Ranch, just east of here. I wanted to welcome you properly, but the crowd's been 3 deep around you all afternoon." "Thank you," Emma said, accepting the woman's warm handshake. The name Jameson rang a bell, and then she remembered Peter Jameson, the young man who'd been engaged to Catherine. Sarah seemed to read her thoughts. "Yes, Peter's my brother. He's here somewhere, probably avoiding the dancing. He's still not quite himself since Catherine passed." Her expression grew somber. They were very much in love. Her death hit him hard. "I'm sorry," Emma said quietly, "for your family's loss and his." "Thank you. But today's about new beginnings, not old sorrows." Sarah's smile returned. "I hope you'll come visit once you're settled. It gets lonely out here for women without other women to talk to. The men are lovely, but they don't understand half of what we need to say." Emma found herself warming to Sarah's straightforward manner. "I'd like that." "Good. Now, fair warning, Mrs. Henderson from town is heading this way, and she's going to interrogate you about your background. She means well, but she's terribly nosy. Just smile and give vague answers. Works every time." Sure enough, a formidable woman in her 60s bore down on them, and Emma spent the next 10 minutes deflecting polite but probing questions about her family, her education, and how exactly she'd ended up at Dawson Creek Ranch. Sarah stayed beside her, occasionally steering the conversation to safer topics, and Emma felt a rush of gratitude for this unexpected ally. As the afternoon wore on, Emma began to relax into the celebration. The food was abundant and delicious: roasted meats, fresh bread, pies, and cakes, contributed by a dozen different households. The music was lively, played by a rotating group of fiddlers and guitar players who seemed to know every dance tune ever written. Children ran wild between the adults, their laughter punctuating the conversations and music. Old Pete cornered Emma near the food tables, his weathered face creased in a smile. "You did good, Miss Emma. I mean Mrs. Dawson. Colt's been needing someone like you. Boy works too hard, takes everything too serious. You'll be good for him." "I hope so," Emma said, meaning it. "He's been very kind to me." "He's a good man. Carries a lot of weight, though, losing his pa, then his sister, trying to keep this place running. He needs someone to share the load."
Pete's eyes twinkled. And between you and me, it's nice to see the books actually balanced for once.
You've done more in 3 weeks than any of us could have managed in 3 years. Emma felt a flush of pride. The ranch accounts were finally in order, every transaction recorded, every bill paid or noted as pending. It had been satisfying work, bringing order from chaos. As evening approached, someone produced a camera, a rare and expensive item on the frontier. The photographer, a serious young man from town named Mr. Ashworth, arranged Emma and Colt in front of the decorated arch for a formal portrait. Emma stood stiffly, acutely aware of Colt's arm around her waist, of the way he stood slightly protective at her side. "Smile, Mrs. Dawson," Mr. Ashworth called out. "This is a happy occasion." Emma tried, but the smile felt forced. Colt must have sensed her tension because he leaned down and whispered, "Just think about Harold Wainwright's face when he finds out you're married. That should make you smile." Despite herself, Emma laughed, and the camera shutter clicked at that exact moment, capturing genuine amusement instead of nervous formality. After the photograph, Miguel approached with a guitar, and the crowd quieted. "A song for the bride and groom," he announced, and began to play something slow and sweet, singing in Spanish. Emma didn't understand all the words, but the melody was beautiful, and the emotion behind it clear, a song about love found unexpectedly, about two souls finding home in each other. "Dance with your wife, Colt," Martha called out, and suddenly Emma found herself pulled into Colt's arms as the crowd formed a circle around them. "I should warn you," Colt murmured as they began to move. "I'm not much of a dancer." "Neither am I," Emma admitted. She'd learned basic steps at her finishing school, but that felt like another lifetime. They moved awkwardly at first, Colt counting under his breath, Emma trying to follow his lead. But gradually, they found a rhythm, and Emma discovered it wasn't so different from their other collaborations. A matter of paying attention, adjusting to each other, working together toward a common goal. "You did beautifully today," Colt said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "I know this isn't easy for you." "It's not so bad," Emma replied, and was surprised to find it was mostly true. The ceremony had been nerve-wracking, but the celebration felt genuine. These people were welcoming her not because they had to, but because they wanted to. It was more than she'd expected, more than she felt she deserved. "I meant what I said earlier," Colt continued, "about you looking like Grace. You took my breath away walking toward me." Emma felt her cheeks heat. She wasn't used to compliments, especially such sincere ones. "The dress is Catherine's, and Martha's lace. I'm just borrowing—" "It's not the dress," Colt interrupted gently. "It's you. The strength in your eyes, the way you hold yourself. You've been through hell, Emma, but you're still standing, still fighting. That's beautiful." Emma didn't know how to respond to that, so she simply let herself lean a little closer, let herself take comfort in his solid presence. Around them, other couples had joined the dance, and the circle had dissolved into a general celebration of movement and music. When the song ended, Colt released her reluctantly, and Emma was immediately claimed by Miguel for the next dance, then James, then several other ranch hands and neighbors. She danced until her feet ached, and her borrowed shoes felt too tight, until the sun began to set and lanterns were lit to hold back the gathering darkness. The evening took on a magical quality as twilight deepened into night. The lanterns cast warm pools of light across the yard. Someone lit a bonfire, and people gathered around it, telling stories and jokes that grew progressively more risque as the evening wore on and the beer barrel ran lower. Children curled up on blankets, fighting sleep. The older folks settled into chairs brought out from the house, content to watch and talk quietly. Emma found herself sitting on a hay bale near the fire, Sarah on one side and Martha on the other, listening to the men argue good-naturedly about cattle prices and grazing rights, and which breed of horse was superior. It was comfortable in a way she'd never experienced, this casual intimacy of community. People gathered not because they had to be, but because they wanted to share in each other's joy. "You'll do fine here," Sarah said quietly, apparently reading Emma's thoughts again. "I can see you're still uncertain, but you belong already. You just don't know it yet." "How can you tell?" Emma asked. "The way you look at this place, at these people. There's affection there, even if you're trying to protect yourself from feeling it too deeply." Sarah smiled. "I did the same thing when I first came here. I grew up in St. Louis, came west with my family when I was 16. Thought I'd hate it. The isolation, the hard work, the lack of sophistication. But the land gets into your blood. The people too. Give it time. Emma wanted to believe her, but doubt still gnawed at her edges. Could she really build a life here? Could this marriage of convenience become something real? Could she ever shake the feeling that she was play acting at being Mrs. Colton Dawson, waiting for someone to expose her as a fraud? As if summoned by her thoughts, Colt appeared beside her, offering his hand. "Walk with me?" he asked. Emma took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. They walked away from the bonfire, toward the darkened pastures where the noise of the celebration faded to a pleasant murmur. The stars overhead were brilliant, undimmed by city lights, stretching from horizon to horizon in a river of light. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed, tilting her head back to take in the vastness of the sky. "One of my favorite things about this place," Colt agreed. "On nights like this, it's easy to believe in something bigger than ourselves." Emma tensed slightly at the religious implication, but Colt didn't push it. They walked in silence for a while, their footsteps crunching in the dry grass. "Are you all right?" he asked finally. "Really all right? Today was a lot." Emma paused, searching for honesty. "I'm overwhelmed, grateful, scared, hopeful, all of it at once." "That seems reasonable," Colt said. "It's been quite a day for both of us." They'd reached the fence line, and Colt stopped, leaning against a post. Emma stood beside him, acutely aware that they were alone for the first time as husband and wife, that the celebration would wind down soon, and everyone would expect them to retire to their cottage. "Colt," she said hesitantly, "about tonight. I know we're married now, but I meant what I said before," he interrupted gently. "We'll take our time. I'm not expecting anything from you that you're not ready to give." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you. I just need time to adjust to all this." "We have time," Colt assured her. "All the time you need." He turned to face her more fully. "Emma, I want you to understand something. This marriage, yes, it started as a practical solution to a problem, but I'm committed to making it real, to building something genuine between us. I won't rush you, but I also won't give up on the possibility that this could become more than just convenience." Emma looked up at him, at his honest face in the starlight, and felt something shift in her chest. Not love. She wasn't ready to call it that. But maybe the beginning of trust. The tentative hope that maybe Colt was right. Maybe they could build something real. "I'll try," she said quietly. "That's all I can promise right now. But I'll try." "That's all I'm asking." Colt smiled and offered his arm. "Now, shall we return to our guests? I believe Martha was organizing some kind of charivari, and I'd like to head that off before it gets too out of hand." Emma laughed, the tension breaking. "What's a charivari?" "Trust me, you don't want to know. It involves noise-making outside the newlyweds' cottage and generally embarrassing everyone involved. It's tradition, but I'm hoping we can convince them we're too dignified for such things." They returned to find the party indeed winding down. Families with children were packing up, calling out final congratulations. The older folks were settling their accounts of who'd ride with whom back to town or neighboring ranches. Martha was directing the cleanup with her usual efficiency, though she kept shooting meaningful glances at Colt and Emma. Peter Jameson approached them hesitantly. He was tall and thin, with haunted eyes that Emma recognized, the look of someone carrying grief they couldn't quite set down. "Congratulations," he said, his voice quiet. "I'm happy for you both. Catherine would have been pleased." "Thank you, Peter," Colt replied warmly. "That means a lot." Peter nodded and moved away quickly, and Emma felt a pang of sympathy. Here was someone else whose life had been derailed by loss, who was still struggling to find his footing. At least she wasn't alone in that. As the last guest departed, calling out final blessings and bawdy jokes, Martha pulled Emma aside. "The cottage is ready. Rosa and I prepared everything this afternoon. There's food in the larder, wood for the stove, linens on the bed, everything you'll need." "Thank you, Martha, for everything. For welcoming me, for planning this beautiful celebration, for raising such a good man." Martha's eyes filled with tears, and she pulled Emma into a tight embrace. "You're my daughter now," she said fiercely, "not by blood, but by choice."
That means if you need anything at all, you come to me. Understand? Emma nodded against her shoulder, her own eyes burning with unshed tears. I understand. Good. Now go on. Your husband's waiting, and you both look exhausted. Colt stood near the cottage door saying final goodbyes to Miguel and the ranch hands. When he saw Emma approaching, he straightened, suddenly looking as nervous as she felt. Ready? He asked. As I'll ever be, Emma replied. He opened the door and gestured for her to enter first. Emma stepped over the threshold and stopped, taking in the transformation.
The cottage glowed with lamplight and candles. Fresh flowers in mason jars adorned every surface. The wooden floors gleamed from recent scrubbing. Colorful rag rugs softened the space. The furniture, a sofa near the fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the window, was simple but inviting. Through an open doorway, Emma could see the bedroom, and her stomach clenched with nervousness. The bed looked enormous, covered with the wedding quilt the church ladies had made, a pattern of interlocking rings in blues and golds. It's beautiful, she said, meaning it. You and Martha did wonderful work. Rosa and the hands helped too, Colt said, closing the door behind them. Everyone wanted to contribute something. An awkward silence fell. They stood in the middle of the main room, husband and wife, alone together for the first time, with nowhere to hide from the reality of what they'd done. Emma, Colt began, then paused, running a hand through his hair. I'm going to make some tea. And then we're going to sit and talk, like we have every evening for the past 3 weeks. This doesn't have to be strange or frightening. We're still the same people we were this morning. Emma felt some of her tension ease. He was right. The ceremony hadn't fundamentally changed who they were or how they related to each other. She moved to the table and sat, watching as Colt competently worked the small stove, heating water and preparing tea with the ease of someone who'd been managing for himself. When he brought 2 cups to the table and sat across from her, it felt almost normal. They sipped in companionable silence for a moment. Tell me about the ranch's winter preparations, Emma said finally, grasping for safe topic. You mentioned you'd need to make some decisions soon about which cattle to keep and which to sell. Colt's face relaxed into relief at the familiar subject, and they spent the next hour discussing ranch business, the economics of winter feeding, the quality of their breeding stock, the repairs needed before the first snow. It was comfortable, engaging, and entirely unsexy, which seemed to suit them both perfectly. Eventually, though, exhaustion caught up with them. Emma found herself stifling yawns, and Colt's eyes were heavy-lidded. We should sleep, he said finally. It's been a long day. Emma's heart rate picked up again. Yes. Colt stood and moved to a trunk in the corner, pulling out a blanket and pillow. I'll sleep on the sofa tonight. Give you privacy to settle in. Colt, you don't have to. I want to, he interrupted gently. Emma, we have the rest of our lives to figure out the sleeping arrangements. Tonight, you need rest more than anything else. Go on, the bedroom's yours. Emma wanted to argue, to say that she couldn't displace him from his own bed on their wedding night. But the truth was, she was grateful. The thought of sharing a bed tonight, even chastely, felt overwhelming. Thank you, she whispered. You're very kind. Not kind, just patient. He smiled at her. Now go on before you fall asleep at the table. Emma retreated to the bedroom, closing the door behind her. Someone, probably Rosa, had left a white cotton nightgown laid out on the bed. Emma changed quickly, braided her hair, and slipped between the sheets. They smelled of lavender and sunshine, fresh from the line. She lay in the darkness, listening to Colt moving around in the other room, the soft sounds of him banking the fire and settling on the sofa. This was her wedding night. She was married. Tomorrow she'd wake up as Mrs. Colton Dawson and begin navigating this strange new life she'd chosen. But for now, she was simply tired. Tired from the long day, from weeks of stress and uncertainty, from the weight of decisions that couldn't be unmade. Emma closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under, her last thought a muddled prayer, not to the God she'd turned away from, but to the universe itself. Please let this work. Please let me not have made another terrible mistake. She woke to morning light streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment she was disoriented, not recognizing the room or the sounds. Then memory returned in a rush. The wedding. The cottage. Colt sleeping on the sofa. Emma rose and dressed quickly in a simple work dress, braiding her hair with practiced efficiency. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Colt at the stove, still in yesterday's shirt and pants, his hair standing up in endearing disarray. "Good morning," he said with a smile. "I hope I didn't wake you. I'm not the quietest cook." "You didn't. This smells wonderful." "Don't get too excited. My cooking skills are limited to breakfast and charred meat over a fire. Everything else, we're at Mama's mercy." They ate together at the small table, and Emma marveled at how normal it felt. Not awkward or strange, just two people sharing a meal and discussing the day ahead. Colt needed to ride out to check on the north pasture. Emma wanted to finish reorganizing the supply inventory. They'd both have dinner at the main house with Martha, as had become their custom. "Oh," Colt said as he stood to clear the dishes. "I almost forgot." He walked to a shelf and retrieved a small wooden box. "This is for you. Was going to give it to you yesterday, but with everything happening, it slipped my mind." Emma opened the box to find a simple gold band. Not fancy or ornate, just a smooth circle of polished gold. "Colt, It was my grandmother's," he explained. "Mama gave it to me last week, said it should go to my wife. If you don't like it, we can get something different in town, but—" "It's perfect," Emma interrupted, slipping it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "Thank you." Colt's answering smile was warm enough to make her heart skip. "You're welcome. Now, I should get to work before Mama sends someone to check on us." After he left, Emma stood in the cottage for a long moment, just taking it in. This was her home now, her space. She ran her fingers over the furniture, the books on the shelf, the colorful pottery Rosa had contributed. It wasn't much by Boston standards, but it was hers. The day passed in the comfortable rhythm of work. Emma spent the morning cataloging supplies, making lists of what they'd need before winter. Martha came by around midday with fresh bread and news that Harold Wainwright had stopped by the main house that morning, demanding to speak with Emma. "I told him you were indisposed," Martha said with satisfaction. "That as a newly married woman you were busy settling into your new home. You should have seen his face when I told him you'd married Colt." "Was he angry?" Emma asked, feeling a twinge of anxiety. "Furious. Turned purple and started blustering about debts and contracts. I told him to take it up with Colt, as your husband was now responsible for any affairs you might have." Martha's smile was fierce. "He left in quite a huff. I don't think we'll be troubled by him again." Emma felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The debt that had hung over her for weeks was finally resolved. She was protected, legally and practically, from Wainwright's schemes. It had cost her her independence, but the price no longer seemed quite so high. That evening, they gathered at the main house for dinner. It was just the four of them: Emma, Colt, Martha, and Rosa, who Martha had insisted join them. They ate roast chicken and potatoes, and Martha regaled them with stories of yesterday's guests and their reactions. "Mrs. Henderson was beside herself with curiosity," Martha laughed. "Kept asking leading questions, trying to find out where you really came from, Emma, and why such a refined lady would end up out here. I told her it was none of her business, but between you and me, having a mysterious background only makes you more interesting to people." "I'm not trying to be mysterious," Emma protested. "My life has just been complicated." "All our lives are complicated, dear," Martha said comfortably. "The trick is deciding which parts to share and which to keep private." After dinner, Colt and Emma walked back to the cottage together under a sky painted orange and pink by the setting sun. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and distant cattle. "Thank you," Emma said as they reached their door. "For what?" "For handling Wainwright. For protecting me. For making this easier than it had any right to be." Colt stopped, turning to face her. "Emma, you don't need to thank me for basic decency. We're in this together now. Your problems are my problems, and vice versa." "Still," Emma insisted, "you've been kind when you didn't have to be. Patient when others wouldn't be. That matters." Colt reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. The gold band on her finger caught the last light of day. "You matter," he said simply. "To me, to Mama, to the ranch. You've brought light back to this place, Emma. Don't discount that." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't feel like I've brought anything but complications." Then your feelings are wrong, Colt said with a gentle smile. Come on, let's go inside. I'll read to you from that Shakespeare book you like while you work on whatever project you've inevitably brought home. And that's exactly what they did. Colt settled in the rocking chair with the book of sonnets while Emma organized her supply lists at the table. His voice was pleasant, if not particularly dramatic, and the familiar words washed over her like a warm bath. It was domestic and comfortable, and nothing like the wedding night she'd once imagined as a young girl reading romance novels in Boston. But it was real, honest, built on respect and kindness rather than passion, and promises neither of them could keep. When Emma finally retired to the bedroom, Colt once again made up the sofa. "Good night, wife," he said with a grin. "Good night, husband," she replied, testing out the word. It still felt strange, but less so than yesterday. That night, Emma slept more soundly than she had in months, and when she woke in the morning to the sound of Colt singing off-key in the kitchen, she found herself smiling despite herself. Maybe this would work after all. The weeks blurred into months with a rhythm that Emma found unexpectedly comforting. Fall deepened into winter, and the Montana landscape transformed under blankets of snow that stretched to the horizon like an ocean frozen in time. The ranch work shifted with the seasons, bringing cattle closer to the barns, breaking ice on water troughs each morning, stockpiling hay and feed for the long, cold months ahead. Emma settled into her role as Colt's wife with more ease than she'd anticipated. The awkwardness of those first nights faded as they established routines that worked for them both. Colt continued sleeping on the sofa without complaint, though Emma noticed he never mentioned it to anyone else, protecting her privacy even from his mother. They worked side by side during the days, Emma managing the books and correspondence while Colt handled the physical labor of ranching, and spent their evenings in quiet companionship, reading or talking or simply existing together in comfortable silence. It wasn't the passionate romance of novels, but it was something perhaps more valuable, genuine partnership built on mutual respect and growing affection. 3 months after the wedding, on a bitterly cold January morning, Emma sat at the kitchen table in the cottage working through supply orders when she heard horses approaching. Through the frost-edged window, she saw 2 riders, Sheriff Morrison from Clearwater and a man she didn't recognize wearing a judge's formal coat despite the weather. Her heart sank. The circuit judge. She'd known he was due to arrive eventually, but she'd allowed herself to hope that Wainwright had given up his pursuit of the debt. Apparently hope had been premature. Colt emerged from the barn as the riders dismounted, and Emma watched through the window as they spoke. Even from a distance, she could read tension in Colt's posture. After a few minutes of conversation, he turned toward the cottage and gestured for her to come out. Emma wrapped herself in her warmest shawl and stepped into the frigid air. The sheriff, a decent man named Tom Morrison, who she'd met several times in town, tipped his hat respectfully. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, "I apologize for the intrusion, but Judge Patterson here needs to speak with you regarding a legal matter." The judge was an older man with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mrs. Dawson, I'm here about a complaint filed by Harold Wainwright regarding a debt allegedly owed by you in the amount of $500. Mr. Wainwright has presented a contract as evidence. I need to hear your response to these claims." "The debt was settled upon our marriage," Colt interjected. "Under territorial law, her debts became mine. I've paid Wainwright in full." Judge Patterson consulted a sheaf of papers. "Mr. Wainwright claims the payment was insufficient and made under duress. He's demanding an additional $200 in interest and damages." Emma felt rage surge through her. "That's extortion. The original debt was questionable enough. My father signed that contract without my knowledge or consent. But now Mr. Wainwright is simply inventing charges." "Do you have proof of payment, Mr. Dawson?" the judge asked. "I do." Colt's voice was steady. "I paid him $600, the original $500 plus $100 in interest, which was more than generous given the circumstances." He signed a receipt. "May I see this receipt?" Colt's expression darkened. He took it with him, said he needed it for his records. I assumed, foolishly it seems, that his word as a gentleman would be sufficient. Judge Patterson sighed, the sound of a man who'd seen too many such cases. "Without that receipt, Mrs. Dawson, you have no proof the debt was paid. Mr. Wainwright claims you still owe the additional amount, and he's within his rights to pursue collection. This is outrageous, Martha's voice rang out as she approached from the main house, her face flushed with anger. Harold Wainwright is a lying cheat, Judge Patterson, and you know it. Everyone in this territory knows it. What I know personally and what I can prove in court are two different things, Martha, the judge replied wearily. I don't like this any more than you do, but the law is the law. Without proof of payment, I have proof, Emma said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. Not of the payment itself, but of Mr. Wainwright's character and intentions. He came here before the wedding and made certain offers, certain suggestions about how I might work off the debt. Martha and Colt both witnessed his implications. The judge's expression sharpened. What kind of suggestions? The kind that make it clear his interest isn't in collecting a legitimate debt, but in exercising power over a vulnerable woman, Emma said, her voice steady despite the anger coursing through her. He wanted me as his household servant, bound to him indefinitely through creative accounting that would ensure I could never fully repay what was owed. That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Dawson. It's the truth, Colt said firmly. I was there. He was threatening her, Judge, trying to coerce her into service that would have been little better than slavery. That's why we married so quickly, to protect Emma from his schemes. Sheriff Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Judge, if I may, Harold Wainwright has a reputation in Clearwater. There have been complaints before about his treatment of people who owe him money. Nothing we could make stick legally, but the pattern is there. Judge Patterson was quiet for a long moment, studying Emma's face. Finally, he said, Mrs. Dawson, did you sign the original contract with Mr. Wainwright's brother? No, sir. My father signed it. I was never consulted and didn't even know about the arrangement until after I'd already left Boston. And you were supposed to marry Robert Chambers in exchange for this dowry money? Yes, sir. But Mr. Chambers died before the marriage could take place. That's correct? The judge consulted his papers again, then looked up with something like satisfaction in his eyes. Then I'm ruling that the debt was invalid from the moment Robert Chambers died. A dowry contract is contingent upon marriage. No marriage, no valid contract. The money advanced was a speculative investment on Mr. Chambers' part, and he assumed the risk when he made it. His heirs have no legitimate claim on you, Mrs. Dawson. Emma felt her knees go weak with relief. I mean, you owe Harold Wainwright nothing. Not now, not ever. And if he continues to harass you about this matter, he'll face charges of his own. Judge Patterson's expression hardened. I'm tired of men like Wainwright using the law as a weapon against vulnerable women. Sheriff Morrison, make sure Mr. Wainwright understands that if he approaches Mrs. Dawson again with these claims, he'll answer to me directly. Yes, sir, the sheriff said with obvious satisfaction. It'll be my pleasure. After the two men rode away, Emma found herself in Colt's arms, shaking with reaction. It's over, she whispered. It's really over. It's over, Colt confirmed, holding her tight. You're free, Emma. Truly free. Martha joined them, wrapping both of them in her embrace. That judge is a good man. Always has been. I'm just glad he saw through Wainwright's lies. That evening, they celebrated quietly in the cottage. Emma felt as though a weight she hadn't fully acknowledged had been lifted from her shoulders. She'd been living under a shadow these past months, always half expecting Wainwright to find some new way to threaten her security. Now that shadow was gone, banished by a judge's ruling and the protection of the law she'd once feared would work against her. You know what this means, Colt said as they sat by the fire after dinner. You're not bound to this marriage anymore. The legal protection was the main reason, well, one of the main reasons, you agreed, but now you don't need it. If you wanted to annul the marriage, we could probably find grounds. Emma looked at him sharply. Is that what you want? No, Colt said immediately, then seemed to catch himself. But what I want isn't the point. You should have the choice, Emma. Real choice. Not choice made under duress. Emma was quiet for a long moment, examining her own heart with the same careful attention she gave the ranch ledgers. What did she want? 3 months ago, she would have said freedom, to leave, to start over somewhere new, to rebuild her life without obligations to anyone. But now? I don't want an annulment, she said finally. This marriage, it's become real to me, Colt. Not in the way I once imagined marriage would be, but real nonetheless. You're my partner, my friend. This is my home. Why would I give that up? The expression on Colt's face was worth every moment of uncertainty. Relief and joy and something deeper, something that made Emma's breath catch. I'm glad, he said simply, because I've come to care for you, Emma, more than I probably should, given our agreement. But I can't help it. You've become essential to me. Emma felt her heart beating faster. Essential? Essential, Colt confirmed. He moved from his chair to kneel beside where she sat, taking her hands in his. Emma, I know we married for practical reasons. I know you don't love me, and I'm not asking you to. But I need you to know I'm falling in love with you. Have been, probably, since the day I found you in that storm. And if you never return those feelings, I'll accept that. But I wanted you to know the truth. Emma felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Colt, You don't have to say anything, he interrupted gently. I'm not asking for declarations or promises. I just wanted you to know where I stand. But Emma was shaking her head. You don't understand. I'm not crying because I don't feel the same. I'm crying because I do, and it terrifies me. Colt went still. You do? I think so. I don't know what love is supposed to feel like anymore. My definition got pretty twisted these past months. But I know that I miss you when you're gone. I know that your happiness matters to me as much as my own. I know that when I imagine the future, you're always in it. Emma reached up to cup his face, feeling the scratch of his evening beard against her palm. If that's love, then yes. I love you. Colt's kiss was different from the chaste peck at their wedding. This was deep and genuine, full of months of restrained emotion finally set free. Emma kissed him back, letting herself feel everything she'd been holding at bay, desire and tenderness and hope, and the terrifying vulnerability of opening her heart again. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Colt rested his forehead against hers. Emma Dawson, he murmured, you're the most remarkable woman I've ever known. I'm really not, Emma protested. I'm just someone who got lost and found her way home. Then I'm glad your way led here. To me. That night, for the first time since their wedding, Colt didn't sleep on the sofa. Emma invited him to the bedroom, and though they moved with shy uncertainty, there was no doubt about the genuine emotion between them. They came together as equals, as partners, as two people who'd found in each other something neither had been looking for but both desperately needed. Afterwards, lying in Colt's arms in the darkness, Emma felt a peace she'd never experienced before. Not the absence of trouble. She knew life would bring more challenges. But the deep knowing that whatever came, she wouldn't face it alone. Colt? She whispered. Do you think it's possible to find faith again after losing it? He was quiet for a moment, his hand making lazy circles on her shoulder. I think faith isn't something you find once and keep forever. It's something you lose and find and lose again, over and over. Each time you find it, it's different. Maybe less innocent, but deeper, more real. I want to believe again, Emma admitted. Not the blind faith I had before, but something more honest, something that acknowledges the hard parts. Then you will, Colt said simply. Give it time. Winter gave way to spring, and spring to summer. The ranch flourished under Emma and Colt's joint management. Emma's careful bookkeeping and Colt's ranching expertise proved a formidable combination. They expanded their herd, improved their grazing land, and built a reputation for fair dealing that brought them respect throughout the territory. Sarah Jameson became a regular visitor, and Emma discovered the joy of genuine friendship with another woman. They'd sit on the cottage porch while their husbands discussed cattle. Peter had finally begun courting again, a sweet girl from town named Lucy, and talk about everything from books to recipes to the complex emotions of building lives in harsh country. Martha remained a constant presence, but as Emma grew more confident, their relationship evolved from protective mother and vulnerable daughter to something more like equals. Emma taught Martha to read without her spectacles using a magnifying glass she'd ordered from a catalog, and Martha taught Emma the 100 small skills needed to thrive on a frontier ranch. Emma never did fully recover the faith of her youth, that innocent certainty that God had a plan and everything would work out. But she found something else, something perhaps more valuable. She found faith in people, in community, in the daily work of showing up and trying and building something meaningful from whatever materials life provided. On Sunday mornings, she and Colt attended the small church in Clearwater. Emma didn't always agree with Reverend Walsh's sermons, and sometimes she sat through the service feeling more doubt than devotion. But she kept going, kept trying, kept leaving space for the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was something larger than herself at work in the world. One evening in late summer, as they sat on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Emma pulled out a letter she'd received that morning. It was from her father, his first response to the letters she'd been sending him every few months. "What does he say?" Colt asked, seeing her hesitation. Emma unfolded the thin paper and read aloud. "My dearest Emma, I cannot tell you what it meant to receive your letters and know you are safe and it seems happy. I have carried such guilt these past months, knowing what my weakness cost you. Your uncle has helped me find work as a bookkeeper. Ironic, isn't it, that I can manage other people's accounts even as I destroyed my own. I am sober now, attending church again, trying to rebuild my life into something resembling respectability. I do not ask your forgiveness. I have no right to such a gift. But I want you to know that I am proud of you. Proud of your strength, your resilience, your ability to build a life from the ashes I left you. Your mother would be proud too. I hope someday you might find it in your heart to write me again. If not, I understand. Your loving father, Joseph." Emma finished reading and found tears on her cheeks. "He's trying," she said quietly. "That's something." "It's more than something," Colt said, putting his arm around her shoulders. "It's everything. Takes courage to admit you were wrong, to try to make amends." "I think I might be ready to forgive him," Emma admitted. "Not forget. I'll never forget what he did. But forgive. Let go of the anger. It's exhausting carrying it around." "Then forgive him," Colt encouraged. "For your sake, not his." Emma wrote back that evening, a longer letter than her previous brief updates. She told her father about the ranch, about Colt and Martha, about the life she was building in Montana. She didn't absolve him of his mistakes, but she did leave the door open for something like reconciliation. It felt like setting down a heavy burden she'd been carrying since Boston. As summer turned to fall again, Emma discovered she was pregnant. The realization came with a mix of emotions, joy and fear and wonder and anxiety all tangled together. She told Colt one evening as they prepared dinner together, the words tumbling out in a nervous rush. "You're sure?" he asked, his face cycling through expressions too quickly for her to read. "As sure as I can be. I've missed 2 courses and I've been sick in the mornings. Rosa says those are the signs." Colt's face broke into the widest smile she'd ever seen. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We're having a baby! Emma, we're having a baby!" His enthusiasm was infectious, and Emma found her own anxiety melting into excitement. "We're having a baby," she repeated, testing the words. "I'm going to be a mother." "And I'm going to be a father." Colt set her down carefully, suddenly treating her like she was made of glass. "Are you happy? I know this is fast, we've only been married a year, but are you happy?" Emma thought about it, really examined her feelings. A year ago, she would have been terrified. But now, with the ranch prospering and her marriage strong and a community around her, she found she was genuinely excited. "I'm happy," she said and meant it. "I'm really, truly happy." Martha cried when they told her, tears of joy streaming down her weathered face. "A grandchild," she kept saying. "I'm going to be a grandmother. Oh, Samuel would be so pleased. And Catherine, she always wanted to be an aunt." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. Emma continued working on the ranch books until she grew too uncomfortable to sit at the desk for long periods. The community rallied around her. Sarah organized a quilting bee to make baby blankets. Rosa taught her about caring for infants, and Martha prepared the small room off the main bedroom as a nursery. Colt became even more protective, hovering constantly until Emma had to gently remind him that women had been having babies since the beginning of time, and she was quite capable of managing. But she found his concern endearing, this strong man reduced to nervous excitement by the prospect of fatherhood. In late March, as winter began its grudging retreat, Emma went into labor. It was long and difficult, nearly 20 hours of pain that had her cursing and crying and begging for relief. But Martha and Rosa stayed with her throughout, coaching her through contractions, wiping her face with cool cloths, assuring her that she was doing well, even when Emma was certain she was dying. Colt paced outside the bedroom door, occasionally calling in to ask if Emma was all right, if she needed anything, if there was anything he could do. The helplessness in his voice would have been funny if Emma hadn't been in so much pain. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, Emma gave birth to a healthy baby boy. He came into the world screaming his displeasure, and Emma had never heard a more beautiful sound. When Rosa placed him in her arms, cleaned and wrapped in one of the hand-quilted blankets, Emma felt something shift in her chest, a love so fierce and immediate it took her breath away. "He's perfect," she whispered, studying his tiny features. He had Colt's nose and what looked like it might be her father's chin. His eyes, still that cloudy newborn blue, blinked up at her with unfocused curiosity. "Can I come in?" Colt's voice from the doorway, tentative and hopeful. "Come meet your son," Emma said, smiling through exhausted tears. Colt entered slowly, his eyes fixed on the bundle in Emma's arms. When he got close enough to see the baby's face clearly, he stopped breathing. "Emma," he whispered, "look what we made." "I know," she replied. "Isn't he beautiful?" Colt reached out with one finger to touch the baby's tiny hand, and the infant's fingers closed around it reflexively. Something in Colt's expression crumbled, and he sank to his knees beside the bed, overcome with emotion. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with tears. "Thank you for this, for him, for everything you've given me." "We made him together," Emma reminded him gently. "This miracle is ours, Colt." They named him Samuel Joseph, Samuel for Colt's father, Joseph for Emma's. It felt like a bridge between their pasts and their future, honoring where they'd come from while claiming who they were becoming. The years that followed were full of the small joys and large struggles that make up a life. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Catherine Rose and another son they called James. The ranch continued to prosper. They weathered droughts and hard winters, market fluctuations, and the occasional crisis, but they weathered them together. Emma never did fully return to the unquestioning faith of her youth, but she found something better, a mature faith that could hold doubt and certainty together, that acknowledged suffering while still believing in grace, that saw God not as a distant judge, but as present in the everyday acts of love and kindness that knitted their community together. She kept her mother's Bible, now worn from use, and read it most mornings before the children woke. Sometimes the words brought comfort, sometimes they brought questions, but she kept reading, kept searching, kept leaving space for mystery and wonder in her understanding of the divine. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Colt presented Emma with a leather-bound journal. Inside, in his careful handwriting, so much improved from those early ledger entries, he'd written something that brought tears to her eyes. "My dear Emma," it read, 20 years ago, I found you kneeling in the mud, saying goodbye to God. Some call it luck that I came along when I did. I call it providence. You were the answer to a prayer I didn't know I'd made. You've brought light and love and laughter into my life. You've given me children and partnership and the kind of deep companionship that makes every day an adventure. Thank you for taking a chance on a broken cowboy. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for being exactly who you are. All my love, always, Colt." Emma read it through tears, then looked up to find her husband watching her with those same blue eyes that had first found her in the storm. "You've made me so happy," she said simply, "happier than I ever thought possible." "Good," Colt replied, pulling her into his arms. "That was always the plan." That evening, they stood together on the porch of the cottage, expanded now to accommodate their growing family, and looked out over Dawson Creek Ranch. The land stretched before them, golden in the evening light. Their children played in the yard, Samuel teaching his younger siblings to rope fence posts. Martha sat in her rocking chair on the main house porch, watching her grandchildren with obvious delight. Emma leaned against Colt's shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him, and thought about the journey that had brought her here, the losses and disappointments, the broken dreams and shattered faith, the desperate prayer in the mud and the stranger who'd appeared through the storm. She'd left Boston with doubt and fear, certain that God had abandoned her. But standing here, surrounded by the life she and Colt had built together, Emma realized something. Maybe God hadn't abandoned her at all. Maybe he'd simply been preparing her for something she never could have imagined, a love deeper than romance, a faith more honest than platitudes, a home built not on certainty, but on the daily choice to show up, to try, to believe in possibility even when outcomes were uncertain. "What are you thinking about?" Colt asked, his arm tightening around her waist. "About roads," Emma said. "How sometimes the broken ones lead exactly where we need to go." "That's pretty philosophical for a Wednesday evening," Colt teased gently. Emma smiled. "I'm a philosophical woman. You should know that by now." "I do know it. It's one of the things I love most about you." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Emma felt a sense of peace settle over her like a blessing. This was grace, she realized. Not the absence of pain or the guarantee of easy answers, but the presence of love and community and purpose, even in the midst of difficulty. She had come to Montana Territory expecting to find a husband she'd never met and build a life according to someone else's plan. Instead, she'd found herself, found her strength, found a partner who saw her not as property or obligation, but as an equal, a companion, someone worth cherishing. And maybe, just maybe, she'd found God again too. Not the God of her childhood certainty, but something truer, a presence in the laughter of her children, in the warmth of her husband's embrace, in the daily work of loving and being loved, in the mercy of second chances and the grace of new beginnings. The broken road had led her home, not to the place she'd intended, but to the place she belonged. And that, Emma decided as she watched her children play and felt Colt's steady heartbeat against her shoulder, was better than any plan she could have made for herself. Sometimes the greatest blessings come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Sometimes faith isn't found in certainty, but in the courage to keep walking even when you can't see the path. Sometimes love grows not from passion, but from the patient work of two people choosing each other, again and again, through all the seasons of a shared life. Emma Sinclair, now Emma Dawson, had learned all these truths on the hard roads between Boston and Montana Territory. And standing here in the twilight, surrounded by the life she'd built from the ruins of her shattered plans, she finally understood what her father had tried to tell her all those months ago in Boston, what she'd been too angry to hear. This had been God's plan all along, not the suffering or loss, though those were simply the cost of living in a broken world, but the redemption, the restoration, the unexpected grace of finding home in the wilderness, love in the storm, faith in the daily work of building something meaningful with another flawed and beautiful human being. "I love you," she said, turning to kiss Colt softly. "I love you too," he replied. "Always have, always will." And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky above Montana, the same stars that had guided her west, that had witnessed her despair and watched her healing, Emma closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, not a plea for help or a desperate bargaining, simply gratitude. Thank you for the broken road, for the storm, for the cowboy who found me, for this life, this love, this home. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on you. Thank you for leading me exactly where I needed to be. The words felt right in a way her prayers hadn't for a long time. Honest, real, full of hard-won wisdom and genuine appreciation. Faith, Emma had learned, wasn't about never doubting. It was about continuing to seek even in the midst of doubt, about leaving space for mystery while still showing up for the concrete work of living, about believing that love, human and divine, could redeem even the most broken situations. She had lost her faith on the road to Montana, but she had found something better, a faith tempered by fire, stronger for having been tested, flexible enough to hold both questions and convictions. And she had found love, real, honest, imperfect love with a man who saw her completely and chose her anyway, who had taken her hand in the storm and never let go. That was grace enough for any lifetime. As they turned to go inside, calling the children in for supper, Emma looked back one more time at the land stretching out to meet the sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The work of ranching never ended. Children would test boundaries, crops might fail, cattle could sicken, money might grow tight. But whatever came, she would face it with Colt beside her, with Martha's wisdom to guide them, with a community that had claimed her as their own, and with a faith that could bend without breaking. The mail-order bride who had lost everything had found what she needed most. Not in the destination she'd planned, but in the detour she'd never expected. Not in certainty, but in trust. Not in independence, but in partnership. And in a cottage on the wide Montana plains, under a sky full of stars, Emma Dawson finally felt complete. Finally felt home. Finally felt found. The broken road had led her here, and here, surrounded by love and purpose, and the daily grace of building a life with someone who truly saw her, was exactly where she belonged.